In the city of Zhuangjing of the Great Xian Nation, specifically at the mansion of the Grand Preceptor, our protagonist of this story, Li Fan, was celebrating his birthday. And despite his old age, his imposing demeanor and admiration from countless people, especially beautiful women, were nothing short than the endless wine he drank throughout his years. You see, in the past 50-odd years, Li Fan went from having nothing to achieving the rank of Grand Tutor, and his power had overshadowed the world that no one could rival him. The story of it all would be enough to fill a multimillion-word novel. But when he remembers the time he first transmigrated to this world, he was nothing but a poor, struggling scholar. Now, looking back on his life, he felt accomplished, having achieved everything a man could ever want. Anyway, back to the birthday party. The entire top floor of the manor were filled with several dancers entertaining the guests under the influence of amazing alcohol and great music. It wasn't until one of Li Fan's subjects crashed the party with an alarming yet felicitous omen. He informed his lord, the Grand Preceptor, that the sky was ablaze with falling flames, a divine sign of an auspicious omen. Also, it looks like it was flying toward the manor. Li Fan rushed to the balcony of his manor to get a better look at what's going on, only to see, just as his subject described, flames were indeed falling from the heavens. But upon a closer look-up, it seems that two powerful figures, being the source of the flames, were actually battling it out. One of them yells the name Dao Xuanzi, telling this person not to take it too far. Everyone, including Li Fan, were absolutely stunned to see these godlike beings who hadn't even noticed their insignificant existence. But unlike the rest who were already on their knees and worshipping their magnificence, Li Fan was quick to realize the implications of the two fighting, even though he was still unable to comprehend how there were actual freaking cultivators in this world. Meanwhile, in the sky, the dark-haired cultivator Dao Xuanzi asked Ko Hong, the sturdy cultivator with a fluffy golden hair like a lion, if he seriously thought he would let him leave just because he fled to the land of immortal extinction. Dao Xuanzi then demanded for Ko Hong to hand over his cultivation method, or the fight won't end until one of them is dead. Ko Hong scoffed at such folly. It's precisely because he lacks a core formation method that he had been trapped at the foundation establishment stage for nearly 100 years. Now, his lifespan limit was approaching, and he was about to turn to dust. Having finally obtained this core formation method, how could he possibly hand it over to another? Dao Xuanzi couldn't agree more. The Golden Core Dao was a path one walks alone. And although there were many core formation methods in this world, there were far more cultivators trapped at the foundation establishment stage. And since it's come to this, with the path to longevity right in front of him, how could he possibly let Ko Hong go? Ko Hong laughed at the absurdity. They were brothers for 100 years. Yet now they draw blades on each other for a mere chance at survival. Ko Hong admits he was no match for Dao Xuanzi, and it seems he won't be escaping his fate in the current situation. However, there were so many mortals below, so he was wondering if Dao Xuanzi could withstand such a dense concentration of the immortal mortal miasma. In reply, Dao Xuanzi just readied his sword for a devastating attack. And without a care in the world, he points the blade at his former companion. His expression suddenly turned furious as he questioned what Ko Hong was planning to do. Conjuring a giant golden dragon to counter Dao Xuanzi's purple blade, Ko Hong announced that perhaps he could find a chance to live if Dao Xuanzi was unable to handle the power of the immortal mortal miasma. Then, moments later, the two powerful techniques clash, creating a massive explosion that lights up the entire sky, and clouding the entire city of Zhuangjing with a deafening blast that reverberated throughout every alley. Seeing a battle of that magnitude, Lin Fan and his servants are completely gobsmacked. And right as that power slams into the entire city, Li Fan, with a panicked look on his face, realizes their demise was inevitable. It took a while for the dust to settle, and amidst the rubble of his home, Li Fan eventually woke up, only to find his wife and children dead. Coughing hard, he got up to see what's left of his mansion. There were dead bodies everywhere, and from the looks of it, he might be the only survivor. The prosperous city that was once full of life was now a living nightmare of fire and blood. And as far as the eye can see, there was indeed nothing but mangled bodies and collapsed buildings. After surviving such a catastrophe, likely not even 1 in 100 of the citizens remained. Li Fan drops to his knees and took a seat amidst the wreckage, absolutely livid that he'd lost everything because of just two cultivators who suddenly appeared out of freaking nowhere. He took a deep breath, then starts laughing in despair. Seriously, how the hell can there be cultivators in this world? From the moment onwards, like an obsessed fanatic the very moment he became an official, Li Fan used the power in his hands to search for any possible trace of the immortal path. After he became the imperial tutor, standing above all others, he scoured the entire world with the aid of his men, relentlessly searching for clues. From the north to the frozen sea, the south to the great ocean, the east to the ruinous abyss, and the west to the linked mountains. In all of Great Xian Nation, there wasn't a single shred of evidence that immortals existed. Li Fan had already given up, and having grown super old, he now even wonders if those two were even real. Looking up at the sky, he wants to know where they came from and what exactly they were. Annoyed, Li Fan thinks that fate was messing with him. So he activates a power called Huanjin. Suddenly, countless glowing subtexts appeared in front of him, and at the bottom was the phrase, "When the true becomes false, the false becomes true." Subsequently, a bright light shined with a dazzling brilliance as the Huanjin system announced that charging was complete. A virtualized current scenario was initiated, and Li Fan was asked if he wants to return to the initial anchor point. You see, Huanjin was the name Li Fan gave to his unique treasure. Its function was to turn truth into illusion and reality into virtuality. It turns everything he had truly experienced into a simulated, illusory experience, allowing him to return to a set anchor point, which was the moment he first transmigrated to this world. In fact, this was already his second life since transmigrating to the Great Xian Nation. In Li Fan's first life, although he had great ambitions, he was ultimately just an ordinary person. Li Fan wanted to become a Zhuangyuan but repeatedly failed the exams. After turning 30, he finally gave up on the idea of becoming an official and started a small business. Li Fan became a common wealthy patriarch, then married, had children, and lived out an ordinary life. It wasn't until he was old and on his deathbed that he finally awakened the unique treasure, Huanjin. This was what led to his unstoppable rise in this second life. Because after the Huanjin system charges, it allows him to restart this life and return to a breakpoint to begin anew. However, Li Fan couldn't restart just yet. He still had important things to do in this life, so he gave orders to a soldier to take care of the mess in the city. He was to order the garrison camp stationed outside the city to rush to Shenzhen and maintain order in the disaster's aftermath. Most of Xuanjing's buildings were destroyed, and after his trusted garrison camp took control of Shenzhen, not only could they expedite the post-disaster reconstruction, more importantly, Li Fan can stay in the barracks to oversee the cleanup efforts and secretly send people to investigate the whereabouts of the two cultivators. 1 month later, the ruined city of Shenzhen had only just begun to recover a semblance of life. Meanwhile, in Li Fan's private quarters, a subordinate reports that there was still no sign of the two cultivators. Li Fan, frustrated upon hearing this, knew he shouldn't have gotten his hopes up again. Anyway, since this was the case, he decided that there was nothing else to do and activated the Huanjin power to go back. He was then suddenly surrounded by blue energy and subtext, and after confirming his decision to restart his life once more, the transition of him going back in time, from his old age all the way back to his youth, was displayed in front of him. Several screens show moments from his life, and as he remembers the names of the two cultivators, he vowed to wait for them in 50 years' time. Li Fan then falls into a portal, determined to hunt the two immortals in his next life. After all, riches and honor were nothing but fleeting clouds to him at this point in his second life. It didn't take long for the system to regress Li Fan to the anchor point. In the first year, overjoyed, Li Fan acted out, and was almost forced by his aunt to drink an exorcism water from the village witch. Half a year later, he took the provincial exam, and although he was placed low in the 30s, he ultimately succeeded in becoming a jurin, bringing honor to his ancestors. In his second year, he took the metropolitan exam and passed. Li Fan performed exceptionally well in the palace exam, placed in the second rank, and was bestowed the title of Jinshi. He then pulled strings in Shenzhen and obtained the post of county magistrate for Jiangnan's one county. In his third year, he began to cultivate his trusted inner circle, and also successfully produced a batch of explosives and matchlock rifles. In his fifth year, refugees gathered to rebel against Prince Langya's manor. Li Fan led troops to the rescue, saving Prince Langya's family. The prince was deeply grateful to him. In the sixth year, Li Fan was promoted to prefect of Jianghuai Prefecture and married the daughter of the vice minister of rights. In the seventh year, his wife bore him a son. In the 10th year, Princess Langya gave birth to a son. Li Fan personally visited to offer congratulations and presented a carefully prepared gift. In the 15th year, the emperor passed away, and Prince Langya inherited the throne, changing the era name to Shenzhen. Emperor Shenzhen summoned Li Fan to the capital, promoted him to vice minister of war, and ordered him to lead troops to suppress rebellions. In the 18th year, Li Fan wiped out the rebel armies, and Emperor Shenzhen reclaimed Li Fan's military authority and promoted him to Minister of War, appointing him Grand Tutor to the Crown Prince. In the 20th year, the Empress was suddenly implicated in a witchcraft case, and Emperor Shenzhen, furious, confined her to the cold palace. The crown prince secretly sought Li Fan's help, and he decisively agreed. Through private investigation, Li Fan found the person who framed the empress, clearing her name. However, the emperor did not release the empress from the cold palace. In the 25th year, Li Fan secretly received news that someone had reported him for privately visiting the empress in the cold palace. And in that same year, the emperor was assassinated while traveling. So the officials retrieved the empress from the cold palace. The crown prince then ascended the throne with the heir named Kongning. In the 26th year, Li Fan was additionally ennobled as Grand Tutor and appointed Grand Scholar of the Deliberative Council, reaching the pinnacle of officialdom. He used this opportunity to eliminate dissent and build his own faction in the imperial court. In his 30th year, the people of the world knew only of the Grand Tutor, not the emperor. In the 31st year, the Empress Dowager became pregnant and bore him a son. In the 38th year, Emperor Hongning died of depression. In the 40th year, the Empress Dowager died of illness. In the 45th year, Li Fan's wife passed away. In the 46th year, Li Fan's eldest son died of illness. And in the 50th year, 2 immortals arrived from the ruinous abyss, destroying the city of Shenzhen. Li Fan only managed to narrowly escape with his life. The simulation ended, and Li Fan had to choose one from the 4 options to retain. The first option was an item in Li Fan's possession during this simulation. The second was his cultivation realm from the simulation. The third was the simulation memory of one person closely related to him. Of course, this memory can be inherited by that person. Then, there's the fourth, which was to forego the above choices to speed up the charging progress. Li Fan kept wondering if what he just lived through was real or just an illusion. Or was it all a simulation, an error in perception caused by it being too real? Or perhaps, upon reaching a certain level, the line between true and false no longer exists. After a brief contemplation, Li Fan sets aside the crazy thoughts and decides to just focus on the 4 options the system gave him. He thinks the first 2 options were self-explanatory. If he ever embark on the path of cultivation, those 2 would be a great help. Unfortunately, he was merely a mortal in this past life. As for the third option, there was no telling what anyone is truly capable of. Therefore, stability was paramount, and that only leaves the 4th option. Since Huanjin's virtualization requires charging, when he receives a fatal blow, Huanjin will consume the charging progress to automatically protect him. This was also why he was able to escape death several times in his previous life. Thus, the 4th option was the safest and most stable choice. Li Fan chose the 4th option and sped up the charging progress. Li Fan had lived 3 lives, accumulating 166 years in total. And about his mental age limit, he remembered in his last life it was only just over 900 years, but now it had increased to over 1,000. You see, when one carries too many memories, one's mental endurance reaches a threshold. Any excessive burden would crush the soul. This was the so-called erosion of time. However, the mental age limit will increase as one's mental fortitude strengthens. So as long as Li Fan step onto the path of cultivation, none of this will be a problem. The goal of his upcoming life was to learn the secrets of cultivation from those 2 cultivators. In 50 years, they will descend upon Shenzhen. With preparation against their lack of it, he might just have a chance of winning. Perhaps what he can rely on, besides guns and explosives, was the immortal miasma they spoke of. However, Li Fan just can't wait idly for 50 years. Since the 2 came from the ruinous abyss in the east, he can first send people deep into the bottom of the abyss to investigate. In his past lives, the most frightening thing was having no goal. Back then, he would often wake from the Empress Dowager's bed in the middle of the night, feeling an immense emptiness and confusion. He had already stood at the absolute pinnacle for a mortal in his past life, so it wasn't like he could go any higher. It would be the same even in another life. Power, pleasure, and the like. After repeating them so many times, they became tasteless as chewing wax. Perhaps, after some future reincarnation, he would have actively chosen to end his own life. But the appearance of those 2 cultivators showed him a brand new possibility. It was as if he was seeing a strange and alluring world beckoning to him. Li Fan wanna cultivate. He longs for a life with new adventures, and no one can stop him. With determination, he swears to cultivate the path of immortality. With the experience of 2 lives, everything went as smoothly as water flowing to its destination. Li Fan still participated in the imperial exams. But this time, with decades of experience and power, the essays he wrote were naturally far superior to his previous lives. In the provincial exam, the metropolitan exam, and the palace exam, he was placed first in all of them, achieving the triple first and shaking the world with his fame. Afterward, he still chose to take an official post in one county. And although there was much confusion and regret in the imperial court, his request was approved. Due to his great fame, coupled with his crystal-clear understanding of the temperaments of every official in the county, Li Fan quickly brought Wen County to heel. He then began to promote and cultivate his trusted subordinates from his past life. In his 4th anchor year, he searched in secret and found someone who could act as Prince Langya's body double, cultivating him as a trusted subordinate. In his 5th anchor year, he ordered his subordinate to pose as a refugee and attack Prince Langya's manor. Li Fan feigned a rescue, but in reality, he coordinated from the inside to kill Prince Langya's entire family. And at the same time, he had the body double take the prince's place. From then on, Li Fan secretly controlled Prince Langya's manor. In his 9th anchor year, the wedding of Prince Langya and the chief grand scholar's granddaughter proceeded as scheduled. That night, Li Fan stormed the bridal chamber and had conjugal relations with Princess Langya. In the 10th anchor year, Princess Langya gave birth to a son. Of course, the child was Li Fan's. In the 15th anchor year, the emperor was finally gravely ill, and after receiving the Edict of Succession, Li Fan rushed to the capital with his trusted subordinates. After Prince Langya ascended the throne, he aggressively placed his subordinates in the imperial court. With the chief grand scholar's covert cooperation, Li Fan easily seized control of the situation. In the 20th anchor year, after helping his son become emperor, Li Fan infected himself as grand tutor, stepping out from behind the curtain to the forefront, once again wielding power over the world. After this, not only did the wheels of the great Xian nation's development not become stagnant, but they turned even faster under his will. At his grand tutor's manor in the 35th anchor year, Li Fan asks a subordinate about the fog over the ruinous abyss. He learned that it dissipates for half a day every 15 years. The hooded subordinate reports that the immortal-seeking camp was ordered to station themselves by the ruinous abyss and observe day and night. It was just a few days ago that they finally made a breakthrough. He adds that after the great fog dispersed, a faint light could be seen shining from the bottom of the abyss. So they used a telescope to observe and actually discovered an inverted landscape. And although what each person saw was not identical, there were 10,000 mountains rising and falling, with magnificent structures hidden among them, barely visible. There were also towering cities on the plains, bustling with life, and with no less than 1 million people. And on top of that, there was even a city in the sky wreathed in rosy light, with all kinds of rare and exotic beasts flying about. It was truly incredible. After receiving a confirmation that the 2 cultivators came from the ruinous abyss, Li Fan wanted to know if they have found a way to get to the bottom of the abyss. But the hooded subordinate replied that they had tried various methods, but as soon as they descend to a certain depth, they were shredded by a sudden astral wind. The astral wind was so terrifying that even the strongest armor could not resist it for a moment. Li Fan dismisses his subordinate with a simple wave of his hand. Then, looking at the full moon, he realizes he would probably have to wait for the 2 cultivators after all. And so, the 50th anchor year eventually arrived in the great Xian nation, bringing with it a very eventful night. In the night sky, the 2 auras of power clash violently once again. And just like last time, Kohong yells the name Dao Xuanzi, telling him not to take it too far. However, this time around, several fiery projectiles were suddenly shot towards the 2 in the middle of their brawl. Kohong gets ticked off and wonders who dares to launch a surprise attack on them. Below, several armed soldiers, with a coordinated effort, fired their rifles relentlessly at the 2 cultivators. However, with a simple hand gesture from Kohong, all the bullets stop in midair as he wonders what they were. And with his curiosity piqued, he used his flames to disarm and summon one of the rifles from a soldier. Incredulous, Kohong finds the weapon fascinating. After all, it was using intricate mechanical structures in place of formations, and the explosive power in place of spiritual energy. To think that after several thousand years, the mortals exiled to this land of immortal extinction could actually research such an ingenious object, Kohong was amazed, though he also thinks it's a pity. The weapon was only effective in the land of immortal extinction where the great Tao was incomplete. But outside this place, it was just a pile of useless scrap metal. Also, at such audacity of mere mortals daring to make a move against them, Kohong, who originally felt a hint of guilt, now had an intolerable expression on his face. He questions if these insignificant mortals were just seeking their own death, before invoking his Tao art technique, the Flame Dragon's Roar. Suddenly, a massive fire dragon was formed, then charged towards every soldier in the manor. But as the enormous dragon whips through the entire city before charging towards its target, the utter destruction it left in its wake was so devastating that it took less than no time for the entire city to bore some resemblance to Li Fan's previous experience. Only this time around, a slight yet shocking deviation left Kohong stunned, wondering what was going on. Apparently, The flame dragon's roar of his was fundamentally not something mortals could withstand. Yet almost every soldier of Li Fan's was surprisingly much alive. In that moment, Dao Xuanzi also noticed that the weapons were soaked in mortals' blood. And after Ko Hong was tainted by the immortal miasma, his Dao arts were weakened. The usage of the immortal miasma meant that the enemy was clearly prepared. At this point, it's obvious they walked into an ambush the very moment they arrived. Since where they were was bizarre and dangerous, Dao Xuanzi suggests they shouldn't stay any longer. But before the two could bounce, a voice threatens that if they flee, the news that they obtained a core formation method would spread throughout the entire cultivation world the very next day. Dao Xuanzi and Ko Hong immediately panicked since only the two were supposed to know about this. They start to wonder who could have leaked the information. But before they could react, several cannonballs heavily condensed with the immortal miasma were fired at them. Furious, Ko Hong yells that the soldiers were courting death, then hurl a massive flame towards the cannonballs. Dao Xuanzi senses the danger in that moment and tried to warn Ko Hong to dodge instead. But it was too late. Ko Hong's flames only managed to trigger all the cannonballs to explode, releasing the immortal miasma. The entire night sky above what remains of the city were coated with heavy raindrops of the immortal miasma, dyeing everything red. And on the ground, somewhere amidst the wreckage was the two cultivators, now surrounded by dozens of armed soldiers. A soldier informed them that their grand tutor had given an order for their lives to be spared if they surrender. Dao Xuanzi, momentarily shaken, scoffs at the idea of surrendering. But before he could actively retaliate, he sees Ko Hong's storage ring hovering in front of him. Knowing the implication of this, Dao Xuanzi, with a look of horror, turned his head in his friend's direction, only to see him advising that he leaves with his storage ring, then dies immediately after. The very moment after Ko Hong's death, a large golden dragon emerged from his body and flies into the night sky above the burning city. The dragon's spirit is then transformed into a tree branch floating in the air. It is then declared that the Foundation Establishment cultivator Ko Hong, cultivated for 205 years, achieved his Dao foundation with the mystical object, the Qiu dragon branch. And in the land of immortal extinction, he was besieged by several thousand mortals and was carelessly injured by the immortal miasma. His cultivation was instantly lost, and his lifespan neared its end. Now, his body perishes and his Dao vanishes, returning the Dao to the heavens. A soldier suddenly speaks up in that moment, telling Dao Xuanzi that their grand tutor has no intention of fighting him to the death. If he gives up on resisting, his life would be guaranteed. Meanwhile, nearby, Li Fan watched the entire scene with a cold and detached expression. He seemed to have heard a strange voice from the sky when Ko Hong died just now. But what that voice was no longer important because it seems capturing the two immortals in this life was no longer possible. Also, he didn't expect the immortal miasma to be so lethal to cultivators. Back to Dao Xuanzi, he got up and informed the soldiers that he didn't know who they were, nor did he know their purpose. However, he and his brother were plotted against by them, resulting in his death and the loss of their Dao. Now, there was nothing more to be said, so he absolutely cannot accept this. This puppeteer, hiding behind these mortal soldiers, and even using the immortal miasma, a despicable thing scorned by all cultivators, to eliminate his brother, Ko Hong, was something he feels wasn't worth it for him. Dao Xuanzi's eyes were filled with rage, teething on the edge of madness as he calmly reminded everyone that they have all seen his brother's Foundation Establishment mystical object. Now, he invites them to take a look at his. Dao Xuanzi slowly took off into the night sky, and with a gesture of his hands, he exclaimed with a chilling tone, "With the wonders of heaven and earth, I build my Dao foundation, a sword named Dao Xian." Dao Xuanzi then invite the spectators all to view it. Suddenly, a freaking gigantic sword about the size of the mountain descended from the sky and crashed directly into what was left of Xianjing. The destruction was inescapable, so Li Fan immediately activated the power of Huanjin and found himself back inside the virtual simulation space. He clutched his chest after experiencing firsthand the power of a cultivator at the peak of the Foundation Establishment. If it weren't for the immortal miasma, even if Li Fan reincarnated 100 times over and used countless schemes, it wouldn't be enough to pose a threat to Dao Xuanzi and Ko Hong. Honestly, Li Fan also didn't expect the immortal miasma to directly cause Ko Hong's body to die and his Dao to vanish. He originally thought when they called each other brother of 100 years it was just talk. He didn't expect their relationship to be so extraordinary. When they were attacked, Dao Xuanzi called out to warn Ko Hong. Ko Hong, knowing he couldn't escape death, willingly gave the core formation method to Dao Xuanzi. And Dao Xuanzi, seeing Ko Hong die by the ambush, was unable to accept it and gave up his chance to live, striking out with a mutual destruction sword art. This all shows that the two truly shared a friendship beyond the ordinary. And about the Golden Core Dao, Li Fan remembers Dao Xuanzi stating that it was a path one walks alone. He deduced that immortal methods probably could not be cultivated together. And if that was the case for men as close as brothers, Li Fan curiously wondered what the cultivation world outside really was like. It seems that no matter how dangerous the path ahead was, Li Fan would not waver. Furthermore, with the help of the Huanjin system, as long as he was careful enough, no predicament should be able to stop him. Last time, he chose to attack both of them at the same time. Perhaps the next time, he can choose to win one of them over. Li Fan's mental age limit only increased by a few dozen this time, and it seems he was nearing his limit. If he counts the life before he transmigrated, this was already his 5th life. The path to seeking immortality was truly difficult, and he hopes the 50 years he was about to begin anew won't be wasted. So, in the 35th anchor year of his new life, Li Fan ventured into the endless ruinous abyss. And from the experience of the last simulation, he knew that the dense fog over the ruinous abyss dissipates once every 15 years. At present, he was there precisely to see it with his own eyes. And after an unknown amount of time, a massive amount of white fog was forced to erupt from the ruinous abyss, rushing straight to the sky like a reverse waterfall. This great wind lasted for a good quarter of an hour before the heavy fog finally dispersed. Li Fan took out the telescope and looked toward the bottom of the ruinous abyss. And according to the intel he had, the scene that appears at the bottom of the ruinous abyss was different for everyone who looks. But upon looking through the telescope, Li Fan could only see a dark abyss with a white light at its center. Then suddenly, the view changes and he sees ruins with an inscription. The path to immortality was dead. Li Fan, shocked and a bit puzzled, wonders what on earth happened in that place and to the world of cultivation. Soon, the scene shifts to Li Fan's 50th birthday, in his 15th anchor year. Ko Hong yells furiously at Dao Xuanzi, reciting the same line as in the previous lives. Then, Li Fan's squad of soldiers attack with their rifles. Only this time around, they only attack Ko Hong under the banner of Dao Xuanzi. Ko Hong, stunned and a bit puzzled, wondered how it was even possible as he blocks the bullets. And although he couldn't comprehend why, he also starts to wonder if Dao Xuanzi already knew he would flee to the land of immortal extinction. Ko Hong's confirmation immediately solidified when he noticed that the bullets were laced with the immortal miasma. He yells at Dao Xuanzi, calling him a despicable friend. Meanwhile, Dao Xuanzi, shell-shocked, was just as confused as his friend. He didn't know why the mortals below were attacking Ko Hong under his banner, and were even using the immortal miasma. He explains to Ko Hong that they weren't under his command, then suggests they get the hell out of there. But in that very moment, Li Fan yells from below, questioning why Dao Xuanzi was going back on his promise. Li Fan then informs Ko Hong of their deal with his friend, stating that as long as they helped Dao Xuanzi eliminate him and seize the core formation method, he would lead the clan out of the immortal Forsaken Land. Ko Hong was enraged at this point. He asked his friend if he still insists on his innocence since besides the two of them, no one knew about the core formation method. Dao Xuanzi, done with this nonsense, decides to find the culprit, Li Fan, who was still running his mouth after revealing his knowledge of the core formation method. Li Fan adds that they had incurred the wrath of the masses for the sake of the immortal miasma Dao Xuanzi spoke of. Now, public resentment was boiling over. So if the immortal master cannot keep his promise and lead them out of the immortal Forsaken Land, he fears it won't be long before his clan dies without a burial place. Annoyed by the false guilt-tripping, Dao Xuanzi charges towards what he believed to be Li Fan, a shameless villain who needs to shut the fuck up. Dao Xuanzi crash lands with a reverberating boom, sending dust and debris flying. Dao Xuanzi spots a radio, which he believes was an artifact. At the same time, Li Fan accuses Dao Xuanzi of trying to permanently silence them. Gritting his teeth, Dao Xuanzi was surprised as to how cautious the enemy was. He instantly destroys the strange artifact, but the damage was already done. Ko Hong, full of righteous fury, accuses his friend of betraying their 100 years of friendship all for pure greed. If he wanted the core formation method, why couldn't he challenge him for it, but resulted to so many underhanded tricks? Ko Hong decides not to flee anymore and chooses to challenge Dao Xuanzi. If his friend has the skill, he should come at him. Ko Hong activates his Flame Dragon's wrath and charges towards Dao Xuanzi, who lets out a helpless sigh after being cornered. With a massive fireball hurled at Dao Xuanzi by the summoned Flame Dragon, Dao Xuanzi calmly counters with his sword. The two attacks collide, creating an explosion. Then, very abruptly, another radio announces Li Fan's decision and reason in switching sides. Since Dao Xuanzi was fickle and vindictive, Li Fan explains he's afraid there would be no escape for him and his men if he wins. So he now ordered his soldiers to assist the immortal master Kohong in dealing with Dao Xuanzi. Upon hearing this, Kohong laughs at his friend, who always prided himself on being noble, but was actually a despicable person who got screwed over by faith and was suffering a backlash. Well, it's as the saying goes, he who commits many injustices is doomed to self-destruct. Dao Xuanzi gets ticked off and calls his gullible friend a fucking fool. But Kohong was far too gone to care or reason with. After all, his friend fancied himself clever, so why was he now deserted by everyone? This was what they call being a victim of one's own cleverness. Kohong, who had recently mastered a new Dao technique, declared that this was the perfect time to test it out. He activated another Dao technique, the imprisoning dragon. A cage made of flame suddenly imprisoned Dao Xuanzi. And to break free, Dao Xuanzi, in rage, enlarges his sword and breaks free with ease. He made his way back in the night sky, fed up with being on the defense. He summoned his Dao Foundation sword and went on the offensive. Dao Xian appears in the sky in all its glory, ready to destroy everything in its path. But Kohong challenges Dao Xian's Dao with his own, invoking his dragon transformation technique, which was the Dao Dragon Staff, a golden dragon to face Dao Xuanzi's giant sword. But before the two Dao summons could clash, Li Fan and his men intervene, lending Kohong a helping hand. They attacked Dao Xuanzi with explosives filled with the immortal miasma, and upon contact, they exploded, releasing the immortal miasma, which instantly clouded Dao Xuanzi. All wounded, Dao Xuanzi let out an ear-piercing cry, and soon realizes that his Dao Dragon branch has been hit. It starts to grow rapidly from within him, then sprout outward. The branches instantly grew and took over his entire body. And eventually, Dao Xuanzi's body gets completely consumed, leaving a lifeless corpse. Anyway, just like Kohong's death in the previous simulation, it's announced that the Foundation Establishment cultivator, Dao Xuanzi, cultivated for 201 years and established his Dao Foundation with the wondrous item, the rusted sword Dao Xian. However, in the immortal Forsaken Land, he fought with another and was ultimately killed at the hands of the Foundation Establishment cultivator, Kohong. Now, his body has perished and his Dao has vanished, returning to the heavens. Li Fan was quick to notice that the voice also appeared when Kohong died before. He made his way to Kohong and introduced himself. Li Fan extend his greetings and respectfully implore Kohong's mercy to save the lives of the 1,000 souls of his clan. Kohong realizes Li Fan was the one whose voice was echoing from all directions earlier. He questioned why a mere mortal dared to interfere in a battle between cultivators. Li Fan explains that he was merely seeking a chance of survival after realizing that his clan would have perished if Dao Xuanzi won the battle. Kohong finds this harsh and Lin Fan takes the opportunity to remind him of the promise Dao Xuanzi made. But Kohong explains that for 100 years, Dao Xuanzi had always appeared to be a man of his word, but in reality, he acts without any principles, even deceiving mortals. He also adds that great immortal severing formation at the ruinous abyss was incredibly dangerous, even for cultivators, requiring a great deal of effort just to leave. So how could they possibly take mortals with them? Li Fan, shocked by the revelation, asks if Kohong also didn't know how to leave the land of immortal extinction with a mortal. Kohong casually confirms this before Li Fan suggests they find somewhere private to talk. In an underground shelter of the manor, Li Fan again wanted to confirm if it's true that mortals cannot be taken along when leaving the immortal Forsaken Land. Kohong had no reason to lie to Li Fan, and simply reminds him that he was a mere mortal. Perhaps a golden core stage cultivator could protect him, a mortal, while breaking through that great immortal severing formation. But for someone with a Foundation Establishment stage cultivation base such as himself, it was absolutely impossible. Li Fan tried to ask for any other alternative. Some hope for mortals like them to someday leave this world. Kohong reiterate that to leave the immortal Forsaken Land, one must pass through the great immortal severing formation. But with the frail body of a mere mortal, it was utterly impossible to pass through. And besides, Li Fan was already old enough to have one foot in his grave. Why was he so obsessed with leaving the land of immortal extinction? Wasn't he satisfied in being a local emperor? Li Fan didn't answer, but wanted to know if it was possible for his descendants to leave if they could cultivate to the Foundation Establishment realm like Kohong. Upon hearing this, Kohong laughed at the absurdity. You see, there was not a shred of spiritual energy in the land of immortal extinction, making cultivation impossible. Also, not only was it a fact that immortals and mortals were perpetually separated, but mortals in the land of immortal extinction were covered in miasma. So how could they possibly cultivate the path of immortality? Kohong then advised Li Fan to give up on this idea. For mortals like him, if they wish to cultivate, they must first go to the outside world to reconstruct their bodies and wash away the miasma. Otherwise, even if the great Tao to immortality were placed right before them, they could see it but never be able to touch it. Frustrated, Li Fan, once again, asks if there was really no way out for mortals like them. And the very moment Ko Hong confirms there wasn't, Li Fan got up and respectfully took his leave. Ko Hong only felt that something was off when Li Fan suddenly stopped short as the door closes behind him. But by then, it was too late. The underground shelter had instantly been filled with the immortal mortal miasma. Ko Hong screams in pain, realizing he's fallen into a trap. Outside the cave, Lin Fan listens to Ko Hong's agonizing screams, and with a cold look, he declares that if immortals and mortals could not coexist, then how could he ever trust the words of an immortal? According to the intel obtained from Ko Hong, the land of immortal extinction was an immortal forsaken land, and the cause of it all stemmed from a great change, an unknown plague in the ancient cultivation world thousands of years ago. At first, no cultivator paid any mind to this plague among mortals. Until the first cultivator was infected by it, the plague was then strengthened and began to spread among cultivators. The vector of transmission was the very spiritual energy that cultivators relied on for survival. The plague, through the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, quickly spread throughout the entire cultivation world. For cultivators infected with this plague, a light case would mean their cultivation base would regress and their realm would fall. A severe case would mean losing their entire cultivation base overnight, becoming no different from a mortal, after which their body would perish and their Tao vanish, returning to the heavens. In their desperation, the cultivators vented their anger on the source of it all, the mortals. Thus, a large-scale campaign of slaughter began. But before long, this campaign of slaughter was forcibly halted. Not only did the plague not disappear with the death of the mortals, it seemed to have lost its restraints, spreading out along the spiritual energy that permeated the heavens and earth. This, in turn, led to the demise of even more cultivators. But waiting for death was not the cultivators' way. On one hand, a group of cultivators began to research methods to treat and resist this plague. On the other, some cultivators proposed the infamous Great Migration Plan. It involved banishing all mortals from the cultivation world to surrounding lesser worlds and shattered the grotto heavens that lacked spiritual energy. They would then use spell formations to permanently isolate them, preventing these mortals from ever returning. Originally, there were no more mortals in the cultivation world, but not all offspring of cultivators had the aptitude for immortal cultivation. So, over time, many new mortals were born into the world. Within the bodies of these mortals lingered a shadow of the plague. And because this plague had a particularly devastating effect on immortal cultivation, the descendants of mortals who wished to cultivate had to first purge the plague from their bodies. Over time, the plague became synonymous with the distinction between immortals and mortals, and so people named it the immortal mortal miasma. Legend has it that to prevent the cultivators within the immortal sex from going astray, the progenitor mortals were banished to the surrounding lesser worlds. And these places of banishment became what mortals call the immortal forsaken lands. Anyway, after a comprehensive read, Li Fan was keenly aware he didn't know how many immortal forsaken lands were there, and the number of cultivators willing to brave the immense risk to enter these places was even smaller. But to have run into two of them was already a stroke of great fortune. As a mortal, his lifespan was limited. Even if he could continuously simulate lifetimes, he was just repeating them within the confines of his lifespan. Li Fan was already 70 years old this year, and his physiological lifespan limit was 86. In the remaining 16 years, he knew the possibility of meeting another cultivator was practically zero. In that very moment, a chilling realization gripped him. Li Fan starts to wonder if he was truly destined to repeat the life of a mortal, lifetime after lifetime. Was there really no other way? Fortunately, it didn't take long for him to snap out of these downward spiral of thoughts. After waiting bitterly for nearly 300 years, how can he be resigned to this? Li Fan then paid a captured Ko Hong a visit, wanting to know how the mortals in the Great Migration arrived in the immortal forsaken land. Ko Hong, upon hearing the question, was genuinely surprised that Li Fan still hadn't given up yet. So what if he managed to get out? At 70 years old, he still want to pursue immortal cultivation? Lin Fan leaning close to Ko Hong's face and reminded him that his cultivation base was completely gone. So as of now, he was just like the rest of them. However, if he were to return to the cultivation world, he might be able to resume cultivating, right? Li Fan proposed a deal with Ko Hong. If he can help him find a way to the cultivation world, then perhaps he would take him along when the time comes. Ko Hong immediately furrowed his brow and calls Li Fan a treacherous villain, realizing the old bastard was still trying to trick him. But Li Fan just calmly retorts, stating that whether what he says happens to be the truth or a lie, it is, in the end, a glimmer of hope. So, was Kohong willing to give up this path to survival, grow old and die in this tiny confinement of his? Kohong was speechless for a moment, but after briefly thinking things over, he gave a reply with a helpless sigh. If he wasn't mistaken, what the cultivators used back then to migrate the mortals was a dharma artifact similar to flying arcs or flying shuttles. You see, in ancient times, the cultivation world was teeming with people, sects were numerous and prominent, and it was incredibly prosperous. Such transportation-type dharma artifacts were also very popular. However, it's a pity that a great cataclysm befell heaven and earth later on, and every cultivator feared for their own safety and began to act alone. So flying arcs and shuttles were rarely seen after that. Hearing of the great cataclysm in heaven and earth, Li Fan asked if Kohong was referring to the bizarre Great Plague. Kohong explains that although the immortal mortal miasma was bizarre, it couldn't shake the foundation of cultivators. The main reason the immortal mortal miasma was able to run rampant was that most of the cultivators in the world had perished in a great calamity. Apparently, the great Tao of the Golden Core, there can be only one. Though there were many core formation methods in this world, there were far more cultivators stuck in the foundation establishment stage. Realization struck Li Fan as he briefly recalls what he saw in the endless ruinous abyss. He then asked if the immortal techniques could not be cultivated by more than one person. Kohong confirms this assessment. You see, it was said that in ancient times, there was no such restriction. Back then, countless great cultivation sects opened their gates wide, accepting disciples and teaching their arts. Cultivators had the guidance of their masters and could ask for help whenever they encountered difficulties in their practice. They could also spar and exchange insights with their fellow disciples who cultivated the same methods. What a vibrant and magnificent scene the entire cultivation world was, until one day, the efficiency of cultivators' practice dropped drastically. While cultivating, they would feel a connection in their hearts, knowing exactly how many people in the entire cultivation world were cultivating the same technique at the same time. They also made a horrifying discovery. The more people who cultivated the same method simultaneously, the lower the cultivation efficiency for everyone practicing that method. Countless cultivators could not advance their cultivation base by a single inch, and as their lifespan's end drew near, they could no longer hide the killing intent in their hearts. Masters and apprentices, martial brothers and sisters of the past, all turned into mortal enemies in an instant. A calamity that swept across the entire cultivation world began. And anyone who practices the same method as another was obstructing the original's path to the Tao. So this led to a fight to the death. Even the rogue cultivators who tried to take refuge by hiding in deep mountains and secret realms could not escape, because cultivators practicing the same method could sense each other's location. Anyway, since immortal techniques cannot be cultivated by more than one person, Li Fan wanted to know just how cultivators practice at present. What was the cultivation world like as of now? Kohong lets out a heavy sigh and replied that as at present in the cultivation world, if one wants to cultivate, there were no more than a few choices. One was to join the Myriad Immortals Alliance. The Myriad Immortals Alliance was a loose coalition formed by numerous cultivators. One can exchange for cultivation methods and resources within the alliance using contribution points. However, to earn contribution points in the alliance, one must accept and complete missions, or by trading with others. The second is the Five Elders Council. The Five Elders Council was an organization founded by 5 top-tier mighty figures, and its influence was immense. As long as one has the aptitude for cultivation, they can voluntarily join and choose a cultivation method. But the price was that one must sign a sole contract and serve the Five Elders Council for a certain period of time. From Kohong's description, it feels like cultivation methods weren't that scarce in the cultivation world. Kohong nodded with a slight smile. The reason was that the methods obtained this way were all incomplete. These methods were all newly compiled by the major powers over the years, so reaching the peak of qi condensation was already their limit. To advance further and establish a Tao foundation, one must switch to a new cultivation method, and the same applies to realms above foundation establishment. Li Fan was a bit puzzled. After all, if one were to switch methods and start over every time they break through to a new realm, didn't that mean all their previous efforts will be for nothing? Kohong explains that that won't happen, because all who cultivate must practice a fragment of the supreme primordial true scripture. This scripture was not a cultivation method, but more of a secret technique. Its function was to allow a cultivator to willingly disperse their realm without significant loss. After dispersing their cultivation to switch to another method, they can quickly catch up to their original realm. A bit shaken, Li Fan was also amazed that such a miraculous method exists. It was as if this fragment appeared at such a convenient time, since only in this way could the many cultivators of the world be made to accept constantly changing their cultivation methods. Kohong could only sigh once again. Li Fan was right, but what else could be done about it? A true method was hard to come by, and his friend, Dao Xuanzi, died without ever knowing the real reason why he snatched the method and ran. It wasn't just because it was a core formation method, but because it was a true method that could lead directly to the nascent soul realm. Next, after Kohong introduced Li Fan to some common knowledge of the cultivation world, such as how a cultivator's demise can trigger celestial phenomena within a certain range, he finally returned to the main topic. He once heard a rumor that for thousands of years, mortals from the immortal Forsaken Lands have been secretly returning to the cultivation world. But it's mostly just idle talk and baseless rumors from the streets, without any concrete evidence. Li Fan points out that there was no smoke without fire. Sometimes, rumors were the truth of the matter, and as long as there was a sliver of hope, he would not give up. Kohong, upon hearing this, really didn't know how an old Li Fan with one foot in the grave can still be so restless. Of course, Li Fan couldn't reveal his secret, and can only assure Kohong that as long as he helps him find the way to the cultivation world, not only will he release him and let him return with him, but he would also return all of Kohong's and Dao Xuanzi's belongings to him, including that nascent soul true method. Shocked as hell, Kohong asked if Li Fan was really serious, and after receiving a confirmation reply, he immediately agreed to help. He vowed to do his utmost to help Li Fan. So, with Kohong's help, Li Fan collected historical books and records from all over the world, striving to find clues about the Great Migration era from the scattered fragments of ancient records. And at the same time, he mobilized the army to excavate ancient tombs on a massive scale, trying to find any trace or clue. Although this caused the people's grievances to boil over and officials submitted memorials to admonish him daily, he forcibly suppressed them all. But unfortunately, too much time has passed since the Great Migration era, and the lifespan he had left in this world was far too short. 16 years later, Li Fan exited the underground secret chamber, knowing full well his end in this simulation was near, yet hadn't found jack shit. His now frail body was like a candle flickering in the wind that could be extinguished at any moment. But before this life ends, he needed to first confirm the items within Kohong's storage ring. Opening the storage space revealed the Thousand Mysteries Jade Cosmos Golden Chapter Scroll. It was a nascent soul realm cultivation method with the current number of cultivators being 0. Li Fan could only pity his current predicament. After all, he was sitting on a mountain of treasures, but had no fortune to enjoy it. Together with the scroll was the rusted sword Daoxian. And according to Kohong, after a cultivator perishes, their foundation establishment wondrous item will lose its wondrous nature as the cultivator's body perishes and the Dao vanishes. But something unexpected happened that made his eyes widen in shock. Apparently, his Huanjin system suddenly discovered the rusted sword Daoxian in his possession and classified it as a rechargeable item, although its current status was damaged. The system then asked if Li Fan wants to proceed with recharge. The moment Li Fan decisively chose yes, the anchor charge progress began with the current anchor points being at 1. Anyway, according to the feedback from Huanjin, the truth returning, when the anchor charge progress reaches 100%, a second anchor point will be unlocked, and in the future, everything will be virtualized. Also, when choosing to return, he can choose to restart from any of the anchor points. If a second anchor point can really be unlocked, it will be so much more convenient. And although wondrous items were rare, the cultivation world was boundlessly vast, so there must be an endless stream of them. As long as Li Fan can leave the immortal Forsaken Land, he can also escape his mortal shackles. Li Fan closed the space ring, aware that other than some standard-issue spirit stones, there was nothing else of value in the ring. So, with a slight reluctance, Li Fan ended the life simulation by activating Huanjin, returning to the virtual simulation space. There, the system gave him the choice to choose one of the 4 options to retain. And although the options were the same as last time, Li Fan's choice was different this time around. The very moment he decisively chose the first option to retain an item, all the items in the storage ring was suddenly displayed in front of him. Li Fan, a bit regretful he couldn't retain all the items in the storage ring at once, lets out a heavy sigh before choosing the nascent soul cultivation method. But something unexpected happened when he checked his system panel. The nascent soul cultivation method he just chose had been bound to him, meaning it would permanently exist within his truth-returning system. After getting over his brief shock, a sly, devious smile tugged on his lips. After all, this unexpected development had opened up many more possibilities for planning in future simulations. You see, in Li Fan's current life, his act of ordering the large-scale excavation of ancient tombs to find a path to the cultivation world was far too shocking. Even with his firm control over the imperial court, it still stirred up considerable opposition. If the court had pushed for it right from the start, it would have surely been unsustainable. But in his next life, if he starts planning from an earlier moment, in 20 years' time, it might not be impossible to change the mindset of the entire world. Time flowed on, and Li Fan's sixth life began. With his subtle influence behind the scenes, many small changes occurred in the world. In the fifth anchor year, an ancient seeking school emerged out of nowhere. This school brought several ancient texts to the capital for an audience with the emperor. The exquisite and unparalleled nature of the ancient texts, rarely seen in the world, shook the nation. The ancient texts were titled Change, Way and Virtue, Southern Flower, the Analects, and the Great Learning. In the sixth anchor year, the emperor suddenly fell gravely ill and was confined to his bed. All the imperial physicians were at their wits' end. Then, the ancient seeking school presented an elixir to the emperor. And at death's door, the emperor consumed the elixir. To everyone's surprise, the elixir had a miraculous effect, and in just a few days the emperor made a full recovery. In the 11th anchor year, Zhonghua Prefecture uncovered a major tomb robbing case, arresting a team of over 100 tomb robbers. The prefect of Zhonghua Prefecture, Li Fan, did not dare to act on his own authority. He wrote a memorial, sent it to Xinjing City via the 800 Li Express, and requested His Majesty's judgment. A full month passed before the emperor's decree finally arrived. They were not sentenced to death, only to be enslaved and sent to the capital. In the 15th anchor year, the emperor fell gravely ill, wishing to extend his life with an immortal pill. He dispatched over 100,000 troops to excavate ancient tombs everywhere in search of traces of such pills. Unfortunately, the immortal pill was hard to find. The emperor died with regret, and the trend of seeking ancient tombs grew even stronger throughout the land. But before his death, the emperor abdicated the throne to the Prince of Langya. And with that, Li Fan once again secretly controlled the world. In Li Fan's 23rd anchor year, following the excavation of an ancient tomb, a lost piece of history was gradually pieced together, a dynasty that could be traced with the name Qi. Li Fan immediately offered a bounty to the world, declaring that anyone who could find a tomb of the Qi dynasty would be ennobled as a marquis. In the 25th anchor year, the tomb of the first emperor of the Qi dynasty, Yixing, was finally found. And after all obstacles were cleared, Li Fan entered the tomb's interior, surrounded by his retinue. In just over a month, a passage to the main burial chamber was carved out. The main tomb passage stretched for several hundred meters, its walls covered in vivid, lifelike murals. Though 1,000 years had passed, they were still clearly visible. Li Fan and his men arrived at the main burial chamber. The chamber was 40 to 50 meters high, with a length and width of several thousand meters. The ceiling seemed to imitate the layout of the stars, inlaid with tens of thousands of luminous pearls. Mountain peaks rose one after another, submerged in a sea of clouds. It was unknown how this sea of clouds was formed, and it remained fixed within the chamber, never drifting. Even after several thousand years, it had not dissipated. Invisible paths connected the various mountain peaks, and everyone marveled in amazement as they walked along. In that moment, Li Fan, marveled at such ingenuity, was convinced that these were truly the methods of an immortal. Anyway, atop the highest peak was a simple thatch hut, and the fertile fields outside was barren. As they drew closer, they realized the thatch of the hut was actually woven from countless fine golden threads. Realizing the thatch hut was clearly Yixing's coffin, Li Fan ordered 2 of his men to go open the door. The 2 did as they were instructed, opening the door, and what was inside stunned Li Fan for a moment before he approached. It was an ancestral shrine for Yixing, an outer disciple of the Taihang sect. It seems that although this person, Yixing, joined a sect called the Taihang sect, he remained just an outer disciple and never set foot on the path to immortality. He was ultimately exiled to this place by the cultivators, and even in death he could not forget his sect. Obviously, Yixing was not identified as an emperor, but a mere outer disciple of the Taihang sect. However, according to Kohong, all the sects in the world should have perished during the Great Calamity before the Great Migration era. So it seems there's a hidden story behind this. Yixing was likely entrusted by the cultivators of the Taihang sect to oversee the Great Migration of this world. In deep thoughts, Li Fan wondered if they would be able to find the flying ark used for the migration back then. Since the search of the main burial chamber yielded nothing, Li Fan ordered the ancient seeking camp to excavate the surrounding area. Several days later, news arrived. Li Fan received a report that the ancient seeking camp had found a record mentioning the words flying ark in the list of burial goods from a nearby attendant tomb chamber. However, that tomb chamber was robbed long ago, and based on the signs of damage, the robbery occurred over 1,000 years ago. Suddenly, an intense murderous aura loomed over Li Fan when he heard this report. Then seconds later, he lost it and furiously trashed everything on a table next to him. Li Fan was pissed off that the same scenario was repeating itself. It was driving him to the fucking wall. Every time he see a glimmer of hope, it ends up being unattainable, like flowers in a mirror or the moon in the water. Anyway, after releasing all his pent-up frustration, Li Fan issued another bounty, another reward to the world. Whoever finds clues related to the immortal arc would be ennobled as a marquis of 1,000 households. And just like that, in his 35th anchor year, the ancient seeking camp found the tomb of an immortal. Apparently, a few days ago, a group of people were excavating an unremarkable grave when they were suddenly injured by a mysterious force, suffering heavy casualties. The ancient seeking camp dared not be negligent and dispatched men to investigate overnight. But even with many highly experienced veterans, they could not disturb this small tomb in the slightest. Li Fan spared no time and ordered for the use of the immortal miasma to open the tomb at once. The ancient seeking camp quickly obliged and poured bucket upon bucket of the immortal miasma on the invisible barrier protecting the tomb from intruders. Fortunately, just like how it was effective against cultivators, the barrier was no different. It didn't take long for it to shatter completely. Li Fan instructed his men to be careful during the excavation and report immediately to him if they find anything resembling a flying ark. Moments later, a report of an object resembling a flying ark among the burial goods reached Li Fan's ears, and he rushed to the site immediately. When he got there, it was indeed as described, a flying freaking ark. But the size of it caught Li Fan off guard. He couldn't help wondering if the small wooden boat in front of him was really the flying ark he had been longing for. However, through the message carved on the tomb wall by its owner before his death, he eventually understood the full story. It turns out the tomb's owner was named Qian Hong, a Foundation establishment stage cultivator. And over 3,000 years ago, he was hunted by his enemies and with nowhere else to go, he hid in this immortal forsaken land. However, since the immortal forsaken land was completely devoid of spiritual energy, and he didn't have many spirit stones on him, his life was at risk. Before long, Qian Hong's spirit stones were depleted, and without spirit stones to replenish his spiritual energy, his cultivation base deteriorated day by day. He speculated that when the mortals were exiled to the immortal forsaken land thousands of years ago, they might have left behind 1 or 2 flying arcs. So he investigated far and wide, spending decades before finally finding the tomb of Yixing. There was indeed a flying arc in the tomb, but to Qian Hong's despair, the core power spell formation inside the arc was already damaged. Furthermore, he didn't know the art of artifact refinement, so he couldn't repair it. At that point, Qian Hong finally gave up on the idea of leaving the immortal forsaken land. Qian Hong left his final words on the tomb wall, telling the person from a later generation who may encounter his tomb. If this person sweeps his grave, he may take one of the 4 items from the cultivation world as his thanks for what was left. Anyway, with the protection of the spell formation outside the tomb, it wasn't surprising Qian Hong was so certain that a cultivator would be the one to arrive. Anyway, in that moment, the Huanjin system notified Li Fan of a wondrous item of heaven and earth, a halting stellar fragment. Li Fan was astonished that he had actually found one, believing it to be the mysterious item guarding the tomb. Unfortunately, the truth returning wasn't reacting to it at all. He realized that forcing his way into the tomb with large amounts of the immortal miasma had likely damaged the halting stellar fragment, turning it into an ordinary stone. With a sigh, Li Fan turned his attention to the other relics. He found a lesser truth-returning vastness Qi condensation stage cultivation method and a cloud water record foundation establishment method, both with their current cultivators being one. Li Fan immediately frowned, puzzled as to how someone was already cultivating these methods. He wondered if it could be a trap, but he quickly realized that that might not be the case. After all, more than 3,000 years had passed, and any cultivator in the Foundation establishment, or even Golden Core realm would have long since turned to dust. But why were these techniques still being practiced? In that moment, a sudden realization struck him. It might be that these methods had a master copy. After the Great Calamity, many cultivation methods were preserved and compiled by major powers like the Myriad Immortals Alliance and the 5 Elders Council. When the management of these major powers sees a method that no one was cultivating, they bring it out again for people to redeem. In other words, over the past 3,000 years, who knows how many owners these 2 methods had passed through. Dropping the scrolls back in frustration, Li Fan muttered bitterly that everything in this world was corrupt. Then, with an immense satisfaction that practically left him shaken with excitement, Li Fan picked the 3rd item, the Taihang Arc, and after changing hands countless times for thousands of years, the Taihang Arc was now in his possession, and along with it, his wish finally being fulfilled after centuries of waiting. Though the Taihang Arc was damaged, Li Fan wasn't concerned the slightest. Qian Hong had failed to repair it, and Li Fan knew he couldn't fix it either. but there was someone who could. So, as the scene shifts to Li Fan's 50th anchor year, the familiar scene on that fateful night unfolded once again. And this time around, before Ko Hong and Dao Xuanzi could finish their verbal exchange, Li Fan interrupted the two, questioning if a mere core formation method was truly worth fighting to death over. Of course, both Ko Hong and Dao Xuanzi couldn't help wondering which insolent mortal dared to speak so arrogantly. Li Fan stepped forward calmly and invited them down for a proper chat. After a moment's hesitation, the two descended and joined Li Fan's party in silence. Li Fan laughed lightly, telling the two that long ago, his ancestor had spoken a prophecy on his deathbed for his future generation that two people would come from the east of the abyssal ruins and set foot in the capital, marking the chance for their clan to finally escape the immortal Forsaken Land. And for thousands of years, his clan had been skeptical. But to have it proven correct calls for a grand toast. Curious, Ko Hong asked for Li Fan's name, and upon reply, Dao Xuanzi, with his eyes narrowed slightly, repeated Li Fan's words with disbelief. He asked if Li Fan's ancestor had truly foreseen their arrival thousands of years ago, and what exactly he meant by an opportunity to escape. Li Fan's expression shifted, growing sharp and almost displeased. He asked if they doubted him. Ko Hong frowned and said the matter sounded too fantastical. They had roamed the cultivation world for centuries, and yet not once heard of anyone capable of deducing events thousands of years ahead. Li Fan then asked if they had ever heard of the Taiyan sect. At once, Ko Hong's eyes widened in shock. He asked if Li Fan meant the very sect that had once been renowned throughout the ancient world for its mastery of the arts of deduction. Li Fan lets out a heavy sigh and told the two to relax. He explained that his ancestor had indeed been a member of the Taiyan sect. However, unlike others, his ancestor had little interest in cultivation itself. Instead, he was completely absorbed and obsessed with the art of deduction and fate calculation. That would have been harmless back then until the great cataclysm struck, forcing all mortals to migrate. With only a key condensation stage cultivation base, no one would have compelled his ancestor to take part in the migration if he was unwilling. Yet, seeing the terror on his family's faces, he volunteered to take responsibility for their safety. Afterwards, he chose to remain in this immortal Forsaken Land with his family. Dao Xuanzi listened quietly and finally asked why Li Fan had chosen to stop their fight. Li Fan answered that no cultivator had stepped into this immortal Forsaken Land for thousands of years. He knew at once that they were the very people his ancestor had prophesied, the key to his clan's escape. But when he saw them about to kill each other over a mere core formation method, he had no choice but to intervene. Dao Xuanzi sighed and nodded slightly in understanding, adding that Li Fan must have found them laughable. But he might not understand how scarce cultivation methods were in the outside world. It was quite normal for cultivators to turn on one another and fight to the death over a single scroll. Li Fan let out a weary sigh and asked if things truly had to come to that. Dao Xuanzi looked at him curiously, sensing something in his tone. But before he could speak further, Li Fan raised his hand and said that before his own son passed away, he inherited a cultivation method that led directly to the Golden Core realm. The two cultivators were shocked. Ko Hong exclaimed that such a method was remarkable. If Dao Xuanzi could obtain it, there would be no need for them to fight anymore. Dao Xuanzi then asked what Li Fan sought in return. Li Fan replied that his ancestor's lifelong wish had been simple, to return to the Taihang sect. And before his death, aside from the cultivation method, he also passed down a Dharma artifact known as the Taihang Arkansas. Though damaged, his ancestor had once used the Taihang art of deduction to foresee that many years later, two cultivators would appear, one skilled in swordsmanship, the other in artifact refinement. Together, they would help his descendants repair the Taihang Ark and finally escape this immortal Forsaken Land. Amazed, Dao Xuanzi exclaimed that the Taihang art of deduction was incredible. His brother Ko Hong was devoted in the art of artifact refinement, and his specialty was precisely sword technique. Ko Hong was in awe with Li Fan's ancestor. After all, to have such unfathomable power with only a Qi condensation stage cultivation base was extremely hard to even imagine. Li Fan dismissed the praise without his evidence as simple talk, so he invited them to see the method first. But before the two could follow, Dao Xuanzi gave his friend a murderous look, reminding him that he already possessed a core formation method. So was he still not satisfied? Ko Hong, suddenly nervous as hell, agreed not to follow and sat back in his seat, whereas Dao Xuanzi followed eagerly, unaware of Li Fan's cold and calculating expression. Li Fan led Dao Xuanzi to the underground chamber. But at the entrance, Dao Xuanzi halted in his tracks very abruptly when he noticed the lingering immortal miasma. Li Fan, upon seeing Dao Xuanzi's fear and hesitation, explained that one can't be too careful. They were mortals after all, and to protect their family's greatest treasure, they had no choice. Li Fan entered alone and came back shortly after holding the cultivation method. At the entrance, he asked Dao Xuanzi to inspect the cultivation method left by his ancestor. Upon seeing the Thousand Mysteries Jade Cosmos Golden Chapter, Dao Xuanzi was completely gobsmacked when he noticed that it was a nascent soul method. Li Fan acknowledged that everything was unfolding exactly as he had predicted. He confessed that earlier, in front of Kohong, he had described his ancestors' inheritance only as a core formation method because he feared provoking malicious thoughts. Dao Xuanzi respectfully praised Li Fan for his sharp mind. He promised Li Fan to rest assured. His friend, Kohong, was an expert in artifact refinement, and he would be persuaded to help repair the Taihang Ark with all his might. Li Fan laughed and stated that he would be counting on Dao Xuanzi. Once the Ark was repaired, he would present the nascent soul method to him personally. Later, Dao Xuanzi informed Kohong telepathically that Li Fan's claim was true. He had seen the ancestral core formation method with his own eyes. Kohong's expression darkened. He vowed to seize the method by force. The moment Kohong suggested that they take the method by force, Dao Xuanzi quickly refused. He reminded his friend that although Li Fan was a mere mortal, he was still a descendant of the Taiyan sect, and their art of deduction was terrifying. If they acted rashly, there was no telling what hidden tricks Li Fan might have up his sleeve. Repairing the Taihang Ark was not a difficult task, so there was no need to invite unnecessary trouble. Dao Xuanzi also considered that if Li Fan were pushed too far, he might reveal that the cultivation method was actually a nascent soul technique, a revelation that would attract disaster. The next day, Li Fan personally handed the Taihang Ark to them for repairs. Kohong examined it with admiration, saying that as expected of an artifact from the Taihang sect, its refinement and the profundity of its spell formations far surpassed anything he had studied. Repairing it would undoubtedly advance his own mastery of artifact refinement. Li Fan told them to proceed freely and assured them that whatever materials they required, he would provide. Cultivation knew no concept of time. What seemed like a small wooden boat took Kohong and his companion nearly an entire year to restore. When Li Fan heard that the repairs were complete, he rushed to see them. Kohong explained that the Taihang Ark's core power formation, the size-changing formation, along with its dust cleansing and several auxiliary formations, had been fully repaired. However, the defensive and offensive formations could only be partially restored due to material limitations. It would be able to break through the great immortal severing formation, but facing the attack of a cultivator would still be difficult. Li Fan told them that this was of no concern. As long as he could escape the great immortal severing formation and return to the cultivation world with his ancestor's relic, he would find a way to rejoin the Taihang sect. Kohong then described the Ark's properties. It was powered by spirit energy and controlled through divine sense. It could transform between three sizes: a compact form about 10 meters long and 2 to 3 meters wide, a medium form roughly 100 meters long, and a fully expanded form that stretched 1,000 meters in length. Though their spirit stone reserves were limited, the energy already stored would be enough for Li Fan to leave in the Ark's second form. Smiling, Kohong asked whether Li Fan, being a mortal, needed their help as a pilot, only to be stunned as the small wooden boat suddenly transformed into a miniature flying ship before their eyes. Kohong was astonished, remarking that Li Fan's methods were truly extraordinary if he could control the Taihang Ark despite lacking cultivation. Li Fan laughed lightly, calling it a minor trick unworthy of praise. He expressed sincere gratitude to the two cultivators, saying that after being trapped for 1,000 years there was finally hope of escape, all thanks to their help. Dao Xuanzi then asked about the promised cultivation method. Li Fan smiled faintly and gestured for them to follow, saying that everything had long been prepared and that he would personally lead them to retrieve it. 3 days later, Kohong and Dao Xuanzi, who had obtained the cultivation method, came to bid Li Fan farewell. Dao Xuanzi explained that they had exhausted most of their spirit stones. If they remained in the immortal Forsaken Land any longer, their cultivation bases might begin to decline. Thus, they had come to take their leave. Kohong told Li Fan that if he ever managed to leave this immortal Forsaken Land, he could find them in Lingtian City near the Tsongyun mountain range. He handed Li Fan a map of the area surrounding the exit of the Great Immortal Severing Formation, drawn carefully from memory. Since there were no blank jade slips available, he had to use paper and brush instead. Li Fan thanked him sincerely. After exchanging a few more pleasantries, Kohong and Dao Xuanzi transformed into 2 streaks of light and disappeared into the distance. Watching them depart, Kohong remarked that Li Fan possessed a remarkable temperament, a true character among mortals. But he sighed, noting that Li Fan's great limit was drawing near. Even if he managed to return to the cultivation world, he would only have a few years left to live. Dao Xuanzi closed his eyes and said softly that without achieving longevity, all else was mere illusion. He reminded his companion that they had once turned against each other and fought to the death, precisely for a chance at immortality. Ko Hong then recalled something and asked his partner which cultivation method Li Fan had given him. Dao Xuanzi smiled faintly and replied that it could not possibly be the same one Ko Hong had received. He added that once he returned, enter a closed-door cultivation and break through to the golden core stage, he would not forget the 3 promises he had made to him. As they ventured deeper into the abyssal ruins, they noticed the protective formation mists still lingering. Dao Xuanzi laughed and asked whether his friend dared to pass through. Then, without hesitation, Ko Hong accepted the challenge and charged forward. Meanwhile, aboard the Taihang Ark, Li Fan stood at the edge gazing into the endless fog of the eastern ruinous abyss. He realized that 14 more years remained before the mist would naturally disperse. By then, he would already be 85. His great limit would be upon him. Smiling faintly, he whispered to himself that there was nothing left in this life to cling to. On that day, he decided to test the true nature of the great immortal severing formation. He guided the Taihang Ark and dove straight into the abyss at full speed. The ruins were blanketed in dense silver fog and the surroundings seemed endless and unreal. Suddenly, the ship jolted violently as if it had collided with something unseen. The entire hull shuddered under immense pressure. He realized he had likely entered the astral wind layer, a region where even a Foundation establishment cultivator would struggle to survive. The wind blades here could tear a mortal apart in an instant. He was grateful for the defensive spell formation protecting the Taihang Ark. Without it, the consequences would have been unimaginable. After half an hour of steady control and resistance against the violent winds, the shaking finally subsided. The thick fog ahead began to clear, replaced by blinding light. At last, he had broken through. Li Fan had escaped the great immortal severing formation. Upon re-entering the cultivation world, he chanced upon a rare and powerful method. Within 100 years, he successfully formed his core, and from that point onward, his cultivation journey was smooth. 1,000 years later, he attained enlightenment and ascended. Upon reaching the immortal realm, he started once more from the lowest rank, cultivating step by step. Through patience and perseverance, he eventually arose to become the Emperor Immortal, the one who ruled above all immortals. Then, transcending even that realm, he shattered the spatial barrier and ascended again into the divine realm itself. Starting as a minor figure in the God realm, Li Fan cultivated for 10,000 years until he reached the God King realm, eventually becoming the most powerful existence in that world. Afterward, he endured countless trials and ascended once again, this time to the primeval God realm, where he began anew as a low-ranking gatekeeper. From there, he started over from scratch, cultivating tirelessly through hardship and solitude. Then, all of a sudden, he opened his eyes and found himself once more in his mortal body, an old man seated within the Taihang Arkansas. He was stunned, wondering if everything he had just experienced was merely an illusion created by the illusory light layer. Looking around, he noticed that the ark had turned on its own. According to Ko Hong's map, he should have already left the illusory light layer and entered the 3rd layer of the immortal Forsaken Continent, the invasion layer. It seemed he had awakened only because the Taihang Ark had automatically navigated out of the illusion. Realizing this, Li Fan reasoned that he must have lost consciousness while passing through the illusory light layer, yet the ark had continued traveling safely on its own. Perhaps he could allow the vessel to steer itself while he supplied the power for acceleration. An intuition flowed from the Taihang Ark into his mind, guiding him in the right direction. Trusting it, Li Fan increased the ark's speed, and soon he arrived at the 4th layer of the immortal Forsaken Continent, the flowing fire layer. Just as he expected, the ark's autonomous navigation was flawless. It seemed this ancient vessel, once designed for migrating mortals 1,000 years ago, had been equipped with a hidden mechanism allowing it to traverse the immortal Forsaken Continent automatically. Having witnessed its reliability, Li Fan chose not to interfere. He simply provided spiritual power and let the Taihang Ark fly on its own. It passed safely through one treacherous region after another, the flowing fire profound ice layer, the thunderstorm layer, and others each perilous. Yet the Ark always managed to avoid disaster by the narrowest margin. After a long and tense journey, he reached the final region, the darkness layer. According to Ko Hong, this layer was not particularly dangerous, merely an endless void of darkness. Yet Li Fan could not help feeling anxious. Once he passed through, the exit to the cultivation world would finally be before him, 6 lifetimes of reincarnation leading to this single moment. Suddenly, a colossal creature emerged from the darkness, a monstrous mouth as vast as a mountain, opening wide to swallow him whole. Just before it struck, Li Fan shouted to the dark void, truth returning, activating Huanjin. In that instant, a mechanical voice echoed in his mind, informing him that the simulation had ended. Eyes wide in horror, Li Fan nearly lost his shit, wondering what the hell that terrifying being was. Ko Hong and Dao Xuanzi had both passed through the great immortal severing formation safely without encountering such creature. He wondered if it was some sort of guardian that appeared only to mortals. It seemed the best course was to wait for the dense fog to disperse and for light to appear at the bottom of the abyssal ruins before attempting the journey again. Though he had failed at the final moment, the insights he had gained from this life far exceeded his expectations. Without hesitation, after choosing to retain the Taihong arc, he began once more, embarking on his 7th life. In the 4th anchor year, Li Fan led his most trusted subordinates to the sealed tomb of Chanhong. This time he came prepared. Using a special spray infused with immortal miasma, he slowly corroded the ancient defenses. Bit by bit, the protective power of the halting steel fragment weakened until it could no longer pierce through his armor. Moments later, the system discovered a rechargeable item, the halting steel fragment. Although damaged, it asked if Li Fan would like to recharge. Without hesitation, Li Fan accepted. Though the fragment had sustained some damage, the anchor charge progress increased by 25%. He calculated that if he could repeat this process 3 more times, he would unlock the 2nd anchor point. The remaining relics within the tomb no longer held any value to him. After ordering his men to reseal the burial site, he quietly departed. In the 5th anchor year, curiosity once again overcame caution. Despite his previous resolve to wait, he could not resist returning to the eastern abyssal ruins. This time he told himself he would only take a look and not descend. Yet as he approached, he noticed that the dense mist beginning to clear away. He stood there in silence, his heart pounding. At that moment, he thought that if he were to pilot the Taihang arc now, he could likely travel smoothly all the way to the immortal realm. He had already waited this long. Must he truly wait another 15 years? His expression hardened. So what if the Huanjin system wasn't fully charged? How could he ever reach the great Tao if he continued to act so timidly? Though anxiety crept into his chest, he steadied his resolve. He had already tested this path once in his previous life. As long as he avoids that unknown creature lurking in the darkness layer, he believed he could finally escape this immortal forsaken place. Just then, a dazzling golden light shined from the abyss ruins, and along with it, something deeply unsettling. As the golden light dissipates, the inscription, "The Path of Immortality was dead," appeared once more. Li Fan, finally back to his senses, wondered what just happened. Moments earlier, countless voices in his head were luring him into the abyssal ruins. If not for the light from the bottom of the abyssal ruins piercing through the great immortal severing formation, he would have been torn into pieces. Anyway, 15 years later, in his 20th anchor year, the truth returning finally finished charging. And with this confidence boost, Li Fan once again returned to the abyssal ruins. He piloted the Taihang arc and reached the thunderstorm layer without any major incident. He stopped just above the darkness layer. Suddenly, a strong wind began to blow, and the frenzied thunderstorm, affected by this strange wind, started to weaken. Specks of light emerged from the darkness, and Li Fan used this precious light to search for the terrifying monster lurking in the dark. Unfortunately, he found nothing. Seeing that the light was about to disappear, he no longer hesitated and piloted the Taihang arc at full speed, racing towards the bottom of the abyssal ruins. Then, out of nowhere, the monstrous mouth suddenly opened wide once again to swallow him whole. But this only proved his speculation to be correct. This behemoth holds great malice towards mortals. Perhaps its mission is to devour any mortal who comes near that place. Li Fan gritted his teeth and changed course, piloting the Taihang arc upward. He narrowly escaped the jaws of death, quite literally, and made his way back to the frenzied thunderstorm layer, close at the edge of the darkness layer, only to realize that the monster had stopped chasing. The behemoth stopped right at the edge of the darkness layer, granting Li Fan the perfect opportunity to use the light from the thunderstorm layer to see what it really looks like. And oh boy, was it freaking enormous. It looked like a whale, only 1,000,000 times bigger. Li Fan wondered what the actual hell was that thing. This terrifying behemoth was so freakishly huge that the Taihang arc should be nothing but a speck of dust in front of its eyes. Yet every time he passed through the dark void, it manages to find him. Even though Li Fan was a bit disheartened, he clenched his teeth in frustration and could only try other methods. Fortunately, he had plenty of chances to do just that. And just like that, over the next 15 years, Li Fan tried to force his way through the darkness layer countless times. But during this time, The time it took for the giant whale to find him after he entered the darkness layer greatly decreased. So, left with no choice, he could only return in defeat after a brief struggle with the giant whale. In his 35th anchor year, at the edge of the thunderstorm layer, Li Fan noticed that only on the day the white mist recedes does the giant whale seem to be delayed by something, discovering him only after a while. With this extra bit of time, he believed perhaps he could fly to the bottom of the abyssal ruins. This time, he decided to go all out and charge straight through at the fastest possible speed to cross the darkness layer before the giant whale could react. He managed to plunge through for the longest time and even saw an illusory scene which appeared below, getting closer and closer. But the giant whale's terrifying cry rang out once again, and along with it, its freakishly wide-opened mouth. Then it was too late. Activating the Huanjin system, he was informed that the simulation had ended. Returning to the virtual simulation space, Li Fan forgo the selection and accelerate the charging progress. He noticed that the upper limit of his psychological age didn't increase. It seems he had already reached the limit, so it wasn't increasing anymore. With a determined look, he lets out a heavy sigh, already aware that he had 748 years to squander. On his 8th lifetime, in the 4th anchor year, he opened Shenhong's tomb once more and accepted the recharged prompt. With his anchor charge progress now at 51% and the current anchor points still at 1, Li Fan took solace that at least his 8th lifetime wasn't a complete waste. In the 5th anchor year, the day the white mist receded, the void transformation charge progress was already close to 90%. But anything less than 100% makes no real difference to him, so he can only wait patiently. In the 20th anchor year, Li Fan tried and failed. In the 35th anchor year, he tried again and failed miserable again. However, these attempts weren't completely useless. At the very least, his control over the Taihang arc became more and more proficient. In the 50th anchor year, Li Fan chose not to force his way through the darkness layer again. He was already old, and his reflexes and mental acuity had declined sharply, so there was no chance of success. He chose to meet his 2 old acquaintances to see if he could get any clues from them. As he watched them from below, hearing their opening sentence just now, Li Fan suddenly feel a bit nostalgic. Anyway, as before, he used the pretext of a core formation method to lure the two to the Grand Tutor's manor. And after 3 rounds of drinks, he took out a scroll with a painting of the behemoth and inquired about it. Li Fan further explains that his ancestor once said on his deathbed that if he ever had the chance to escape the immortal Forsaken Land, he wouldn't need to worry about anything else. With the protection of their sex Taihang arc, he would be safe. But the final layer, where a giant whale lurks, requires the utmost caution. The 2 cultivators were extremely unsettled with this knowledge, completely unaware that there was such a ferocious beast in that pitch-black, empty place. And how come they didn't see it? A sudden realization struck Dao Xuanzi, and Li Fan was quick to notice. It looks like the Sword Dao cultivator seems to know of the beast. Dao Xuanzi calmly explains that he had only seen records of it in an ancient text. And it was said that in ancient times, there was a sect named beast taming. The beast taming sect had no profound cultivation methods. Relying solely on their beast taming art, they could control the exotic beasts of heaven and earth to fight for them. And among the most famous exotic beasts controlled by the beast taming sect, this giant whale seems to be one of them. In that moment, Ko Hong seems to also have a faint recollection on the topic. He recalled the name of the beast to be a rift-splitting whale. Li Fan then asked if either of them knew how to avoid this rift-splitting whale. But to his dismay, they replied that they've only heard fragments about such beast and had no reliable insight. After all, such an exotic beast disappeared from the cultivation world thousands of years ago. Upon hearing this, Li Fan lets out a sigh and raised his head in disappointment. In the end, he still had to rely on himself. Anyway, after handing the cultivation method to Dao Xuanzi and sending the 2 away, Li Fan chose to end his 8th lifetime. And in his 9th lifetime, he opened Shenhong's tomb again, wanting to absorb the halting steel fragment to charge up. Unfortunately, the truth-returning system had no reaction. In his 20th, 35th, and 50th anchor year, he tried repeatedly, but could not break through the darkness layer. In the 65th anchor year, Li Fan was already 85 years old, and his life was nearing its end. Since he was too old, he could no longer outwit or outfight the giant whale. Li Fan decided not to force it. He will just completely give up control of the Taihang arc and let it slowly drift towards the bottom of the abyssal ruins from the start, drifting through the astral wind layer, the illusory light layer, the inversion layer, the flowing fire layer, the profound ice layer, the thunderstorm layer, and the darkness layer. But to his incomprehension, the rift-splitting whale was nowhere to be seen. Li Fan, absolutely mind-boggled and in a daze, kept wondering what was happening. Why didn't the rift-splitting whale appear this time around? He was almost at the very bottom of the abyssal ruins and could even see the exit. Li Fan decided not to miss this amazing opportunity. So, with every ounce of energy he had left, Li Fan sped up full throttle ahead. But to his confusion, the rift-splitting whale suddenly appeared right behind him, closing in fast. It opened its freakishly enormous mouth, wanting to swallow the Taihang arc whole. Meanwhile, Li Fan was still puzzled as to why it suddenly discovered him. That's when it clicks, realization hitting him like a thunderclap. This rift-splitting whale cannot see, or rather, it ignores objects moving at a constant velocity. So as long as he maintained the same speed, he can pass through the darkness layer of the Great Immortal Severing Formation safely. Li Fan, overwhelmed with this realization, couldn't help laughing wholeheartedly. He couldn't even believe that the last shackle keeping him in the immortal Forsaken Land was completely broken by him. Anyway, back to the rift-splitting whale, it eventually closed its mouth but missed the Taihang arc spectacularly. And amidst Li Fan's wild laughter and the giant whale's roar, the Taihang arc broke through the rift between the two realms and headed straight for the cultivation world. But in that very moment, Li Fan's surroundings blurred, and it was as if he had instantly crossed the distance of several worlds. Under immense pressure, blood streamed from his nose, eyes, and mouth, but he paid it no mind. Looking back at the Great Immortal Severing Formation, his perspective was now infinitely elevated. However, at that moment he saw a sight he would never forget. It was the rift-splitting whale, hundreds of them, actually, thousands upon thousands of rift-splitting whales, carving out patches of dark space from the void and the immortal Forsaken Land he just came from. From the perspective of the cultivation world, growing ever more distant. Soon, the Taihang arc suddenly emerged from an abyssal ruin similar to the ruinous abyss in the immortal Forsaken Land. And as it briefly traversed in the immortal plains, Li Fan, at death's door, smiled in sheer delight. He had finally entered the cultivation world, even though it was extremely brief. To be able to see it before dying meant his ninth life wasn't lived in vain. And with that, he activated Huanjin, ending the simulation. Li Fan was immensely satisfied with this outcome. 9 lives and nearly 500 long years, he had finally touched the threshold of cultivation. Anyway, according to his previous plan, he was going to choose to speed up the charging progress. But after seeing the list of selectable items, he now hesitated. As the system gave him another 4 options to choose from, Li Fan was shocked to see the halting steel fragment as an item he could retain. So after some thought, he decided to choose to retain the steel fragment, simply because it was a good chance to verify a certain guess in his heart. And with that, his 10th life began. Since he didn't choose to accelerate charging, he need to wait 20 years for it to complete. In the 3rd anchor year, Li Fan came to the outside of Qianhong's tomb. He didn't choose to use the immortal miasma to break into the tomb, but instead directly took out the halting steel fragment from the Huanjin system. After this steel fragment brought from his previous life appeared in the world, a wondrous change occurred. It actually began to slowly dissipate, like a block of ice under the scorching sun. And the formation generated by the halting steel fragment inside Qianhong's tomb clearly grew much stronger. This was just as Li Fan thought. Mystical objects of heaven and earth possess uniqueness, and 2 identical mystical objects should not exist in the world. Yet with the Huanjin system's ability, he created an identical one from thin air. The consequence was that the 2 mystical objects spontaneously merged, ultimately becoming one. Afterward, Li Fan ordered his subordinates to use the immortal miasma spray to break into the tomb. It took a considerable effort to slowly wear down its power. Entering Qianhong's tomb, the halting steel fragment's appearance hadn't changed much. It just looked slightly less damaged, and it seems the Huanjin system still can't absorb it. And from the looks of it, the halting steel fragment needs to be repaired more completely before it has new energy for Huanjin to absorb. Li Fan then stored this strengthened version of the halting steel fragment in the Taihang boat, as part of his belongings for the future trip to the cultivation world. In the 20th anchor year, the Huanjin system was nearing its charging completion. So Li Fan ruthlessly investigated and purged a batch of corrupt officials and powerful landlords, taking all the gold, silver, and jewels their families had accumulated over generations. This was because he would still have to deal with mortals after arriving in the cultivation world. So gold, silver, and other valuables must be prepared in advance. Besides money, food was also essential. But grain was the foundation of the nation, and besides, he was asking for far too much at once. The officials all submitted memorials in opposition. But Li Fan didn't waste words. In front of all the civil and military officials, he expanded the Taihang boat to its maximum size, suspending it in the air above the imperial palace. After the common people saw this, they all knelt and kowtowed. And when the civil and military officials in the court saw such immortal methods, they all changed their attitudes. They proactively and diligently helped him prepare the grain. With the officials' proactive help, plus the execution of a batch of profiteering merchants, the Taiyan boat was finally stuffed full. All preparations were made. Li Fan had no more ties to the mortal world. Piloting the Taiyan boat, he once again came to the skies above the ruinous abyss. He relaxed his mind and let the Taiyan boat autopilot at a constant speed. It only took a few hours, but in his eyes, it felt even longer than the hundreds of years he had experienced before. The tearing sensation of crossing between two worlds washed over him. But this time around, he gradually adapted to it. After a long wait, he finally passed through the immortal extinction Great Formation and arrived in the cultivation world. However, after getting a clear look at the surrounding scenery, he was a bit dumbfounded. He wondered what was going on. Why was the place he emerged from completely different this time around? He couldn't even find the location of a sea on Kohong's map either. But since he can only take it one step at a time, Li Fan dropped the issue. He wondered if he could find an inhabited place before the spirit stones in the Taihang boat run out. On the vast sea, he randomly picked a direction and piloted the Taihang boat, flying while searching everywhere for traces of cities. The sea was truly vast and boundless, and he flew for 7 days and 7 nights without seeing any sign of human habitation. After another 10+ days like this, the Taihang boat's speed grew slower and slower as it was about to run out of power. Fortunately, just at this desperate moment, the faint shadow of a ship finally appeared on the sea in the distance. When Li Fan looked at the ship with his telescope, he was speechless. It was an actual ship, but in the process of sinking. It seemed to have been attacked because there was a large hole in the hull, and 2/3 of it was already submerged. In the water around the ship, dozens of people were struggling, clearly the ship's crew and passengers. At that moment, one of the passengers assured the rest not to be afraid. They should just hold on a little longer. He had already sent a signal to an immortal master, and he would soon be there to save them. Hearing of an immortal master, Li Fan's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly devised a plan. He put away the Taihang boat, jumped into the sea, and quietly swam toward their direction. He then silently blended into the crowd, also pretending to be on his last breath, barely struggling to survive. When the immortal master arrived, hovering just above them, he seemed to have used some sort of magic art. His clothes and face were as if behind a layer of gauze, impossible to see clearly. Li Fan joined the desperate crowd, begging to be saved. But this was creating so much noise that the immortal master couldn't tolerate. In that moment, the surroundings instantly fell silent. Li Fan was stunned to also find out that he couldn't make a sound. Then, with a casual flick of a finger, the ship, which was already mostly submerged, got lifted out of the water, and the large hole in its hull was actually repaired in an instant. The immortal master then waved his hand, and everyone, including Li Fan, was hurled back into the ship by an invisible force. He then asked for the person responsible for the signal transmission. The passenger in question, Su Changyu, bowed and replied that it was him, referring to himself as a lowly one. The immortal master then asked Su Changyu if he understood the rules. After they get to the place, what happens has nothing to do with him. He had never seen any of them, and he didn't know who any of them were. Su Changyu respectfully replied that he understands. The immortal master said nothing more and simply waved his hand for the second time. Then, very abruptly, the ship began to move quickly in a certain direction. Although Li Fan was amazed, he didn't know what magic art the immortal master used, and the Huanjin system didn't pick up on anything. The immortal master stood at the bow, not saying a word, and everyone on the ship once again fell into a strange silence. More than half a day passed like this. Then, after dark, a faint flickering light was finally visible in the distance. It was an island that looked quite prosperous. Hundreds of large ships were docked at the island's harbor, and it was truly a magnificent sight. However, the ship Li Fan was on did not head toward the harbor. Instead, it went halfway around the island, coming to a sparsely populated area on the back. The ship quietly followed a waterway into a natural karst cave, and after traveling through the narrow cave for a while, the ship finally stopped. After the ship stabilized, several burly men in black came aboard to meet it. The men in black acted as if they didn't even see the immortal master, simply herding everyone on the ship to disembark. They then brought everyone to a spacious hall. One of them announced that everyone would rest there for the night. There was plenty of food in the hall, and they may take as they wish. After giving these instructions, the men in black turned and left. Amidst the crowd, a young guy complained about their rotten luck to actually run into a sea monster. There were nearly 100 of them when they set out, but now less than half have survived. Another chimed in, adding that he didn't know what his father was thinking, insisting on sending him to this great world to cultivate. But if anyone was to ask him, how can cultivating be as fun as listening to music? The young guy agreed, informing the rest that back in his homeland, he was the son of the Prince of Jinan. What riches and glory couldn't he enjoy? And what's so good about this godforsaken place? But Su Changyu suddenly questioned them what the point was for complaining now. After all, which family among them didn't pay a huge price to send them all there? Instead of complaining, they might as well cultivate patiently. If they can really become an immortal master, not only will they have hope for long life, they would also have a chance to return to their homeland and possibly bring their family out of their mortal shackles. Li Fan was quick to realize that everyone there was just like him. Mortals exiled from a land of immortal extinction. But it's just that, in the land of immortal extinction they came from, the existence of the cultivation world doesn't seem to be a secret. And they had already developed a mature smuggling route. In that moment, someone claps Li Fan's shoulder, unsettling him. This big guy wanted to know what official post Li Fan held in Dali because he looks a bit unfamiliar. Or perhaps he was a wealthy merchant from one of the provinces. Suddenly, Li Fan's expression turned dark, and the very second he turned in the big guy's direction, he slapped his hand away, bruising it in the process. The fatty, sensing the bone-chilling aura radiating off Li Fan, apologized and backed the fuck off like a terrified chicken. Just a stare from this person had scared him to death. And he felt like Li Fan was giving off an aura of a person who had been in a high position for years, which was indeed the case. Li Fan was no simple character. The next day, at dawn, a middle-aged man came to the spacious hall and announced that he would soon take them to get their household registration. Once they have it, they would officially become members of Liuli Island. But they must remember not to say what should not be said. Otherwise, he cannot guarantee their safety. They were all residents of the western Dayu Island, and their island was destroyed by a windstorm, which was why they fled to Liuli Island as refugees. He then informed them that they were free to ask questions if they have any. But seeing as no one dared to ask any question, the middle-aged man instructed them to change into tattered clothes. Afterward, under the lead of the middle-aged man and the watch of 4 or 5 men in black, they followed a hidden passage out of the karst cave and came to the surface. Their group of several dozen people was not small, but most of the island's residents merely gave them a casual glance before paying no more attention, clearly accustomed to such sights. After twisting and turning through the city's residential area for God knows how long, they eventually arrived before a manor. And not long after, the young servant at the gate went inside to announce their arrival and returned. Then, leading them through a side door on the left and into a large hall, 2 or 3 other groups, totaling over 100 people, were already gathered in the large hall. Soon it was their turn. The middle-aged man, Sun Zhang, respectfully greeted Steward Zhao, one of the Lord's aide overseeing this occasion. Steward Zhao calmly asked Sun Zhang if the group he brought were all the refugees to be registered. After receiving a confirmation reply, he then asked if they were either rich or noble. Sun Zhang smiled and took something from the breast pocket of his robe, then replied that they were all wealthy families on Dayu Island. He presented the treasure to Steward Zhao, and added that it was unfortunate all their wealth and glory vanished like a bubble without the protection of an immortal master when the disaster struck. Now, they can only travel thousands of miles to seek refuge on their Liuli Island. Apparently, a windstorm raged a few days ago, and even their Liuli Island was affected. But the western islands suffered even heavier losses. It was said that over 200 islands were razed to the ground, and countless mortals perished at sea. Fortunately, the immortal masters were merciful and ordered them to rescue the refugees. Steward Zhao stated that it was a good thing that Sun Zhang's Tianbao Lu was so dedicated, but he should rest assured he would report this truthfully to the island lord. And when the immortal master's rewards are handed down, Sun Zhang would surely get his share. Afterward, Steward Zhao began processing the registration procedures for everyone. Before long, it was Li Fan's turn. When Steward Zhao looked up at Li Fan's demeanor and composure, he instinctively felt an aura of an important person. He calmly asked Li Fan for his name, and upon reply, inscribed it on a blank paper talisman before handing over. Steward Zhao then instructed Li Fan to place a drop of his blood on it. Li Fan bit his thumb and did as he was instructed. Steward Zhao informed Li Fan to keep this spirit talisman safe, because from that point forth it will be his proof of identity. Li Fan would need to present the spirit talisman for all matters on the island, big or small, such as receiving work, collecting grain, and undergoing inspections. He then warned Li Fan to never lose it. Meanwhile, as Steward Zhao relayed all this intel to Li Fan, Sun Zhang, who stood at his side, was puzzled. He couldn't comprehend why Steward Zhao was being so cordial to Li Fan, explaining so much. Anyway, the household registrations were distributed very efficiently, and the entire group received their Liuli Island registrations. Immediately after that, they left that place and did not return to the karst cave. Instead, Sun Zhang led them into the courtyard of a residence. There, he asked with a satisfied smile that they can now sign the contract since the household registrations were in order. Without a word, Su Changyu calmly took out a paper talisman from his robe, bit his finger and smeared his blood on it. The paper talisman, which also had his name on it, suddenly dissipated into thin air. This was the so-called 3 contracts to finalize. And in the future, once they were completely settled, Su Changyu vowed to sign the final contract as promised. Sun Zhang clutched his head with a displeasured look, then comments that dealing with people like Su Changyu from the departed realm was such a hassle. If it weren't for the sake of the immortal master, their Tianbao Lu would never engage in such an unprofitable business. Sun Zhang then announced that all residents of Liuli Island can claim a place to live using their household registration spirit talisman. And in addition, during the first year of registration, they can receive a certain amount of grain for free each month. Although these were all crucial intel, Su Changyu was more concerned about what they must do if they wish to cultivate. Sun Zhang replied honestly that mortals like them who had returned from the land of exile had a much higher concentration of miasma in their bodies than ordinary people. So if they want to cultivate, they must first dispel the miasma from their bodies. Of course, they were already aware of this matter. The issue was how they could get the miasma removed. Sun Zhang explains that there were several methods to remove the miasma. The first was the island's body-purifying spirit pool. Soaking in the spirit pool for a day and a night can completely remove all the miasma from their bodies. But unfortunately, the materials required to open the spirit pool were astonishingly expensive. And although their Liuli Island was wealthy, they can only open it once every 3 years. Sun Zhang then feigned being in deep thoughts, and added that the last time the spirit pool was opened was a year ago, which means they would have to wait about 2 more years for it to be opened again. And besides, the number of spots available for the spirit pool was limited and the competition was fierce. How could outsiders like them with no foundation possibly compete with the people of the island? Su Changyu then asked of the other methods. And apparently, the second method was to cultivate the profound yellow heart-cleansing incantation, paired with specific medicines and diet. This would gradually change their constitution over time and eventually clear out the miasma completely. Although this method was time-consuming, often taking 5 or 6 years, its advantage was its stability. Nor does it require any special price to be paid. The profound yellow heart-cleansing incantation and its corresponding elixirs can be bought at the island's pharmacies. Su Changyu was deeply unsettled with the number of years and asked if those 2 were the only methods. Suddenly, Sun Zhang's expression darkened as he declared that there was a third method, which was to become a test subject. Reiterating what they just heard, the entire group was deeply shaken as Sun Zhang confirms his earlier words, explaining that some immortal masters were very interested in the miasma inside a mortal's body. And every year, volunteers are selected from the mortals on the island to serve as test subjects. The immortal masters use special methods to extract the miasma from the test subjects' bodies for research. It only takes a few months to completely drain the miasma from a test subject's body. However, the process was excruciatingly painful, and it was a state of being unable to live and unable to die. Often, the vast majority of people can't endure until the miasma is fully extracted and are driven completely mad by the torture. Once again, Su Changyu asked if there wasn't any other method as Sun Zhang added somewhat skeptically. Apparently, it's said that the direct mortal descendants of those immortal masters can rely on heavenly materials and earthly treasures to reconstruct their bodies. Not only would they no longer have to worry about the affliction of miasma, but they could also improve their cultivation aptitude. However, such methods were beyond their imagination. Even their island lord of Liuli Island didn't receive such treatment. Sun Zhang then declared that this was all he knew. But if they truly wished to cultivate, they should all think it over carefully in the coming days. He was fully aware they had all returned from the land of exile after enduring countless hardships, and they all have a heart that yearns for the Tao. This was completely understandable. After all, who among them on the island wasn't like that in the beginning? But unfortunately, the path of immortality was incredibly difficult. Even if they managed to remove all the miasma from their bodies, very few can sense the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and guide it into their bodies. So why seek out trouble? And besides, there was nothing wrong with being immortal. Instead of bitterly pursuing the path of immortality, it was better to enjoy life, indulge in its passions, and live in the moment. Su Changyu remained silent with his fist clenched tightly. And from the looks of it, it's evidently clear he had no intention of giving up on pursuing the path of immortality. Anyway, after Sun Zhang left, the crowd dispersed. Li Fan asked around and found the place claiming to have free housing. He showed his spirit talisman and was then led by a guide to the residential area in the northern part of Lioli Island. Countless houses were densely packed there, and most of these houses had only one room, but fortunately, they all had small courtyards enclosed by walls, so they didn't seem too shabby. After handing him the key, the guide left. Inside, the room was very simple, with only a bed and a few tables and chairs. But at least he had settled down without much trouble. And it was all thanks to those people from the departed realm. Unfortunately, aside from Su Changyu, this group seems to be entirely mediocre, with no heart for the Tao, incapable of achieving anything great. However, since his primary goal now was to remove the miasma from his body, Li Fan was seriously considering the spirit pool. And although the spots for entering the body-purifying spirit pool were precious, the treasures he had plundered from within the Taihang Arc were countless. So forcing his way into a spot shouldn't be too difficult. However, the downside was that it's too conspicuous. And as they say, one shouldn't flash his wealth. Li Fan had yet to have any foundation on Lioli Island, so suddenly revealing too much wealth will surely attract prying eyes. He needed to plan this carefully. In that moment, someone suddenly knocked on his door, and upon asking who was there, this person simply whispered a reply, giving nothing away. Li Fan drew a sword from his current miniature Taihang Arc and made his way to the door. Then, opening it slightly, he was a bit uneasy and annoyed to see Fatty, who rudely barged in and accused Li Fan of not being one of them. He was confident that Li Fan wasn't from the departed realm. And with his brow furrowed, he asked who Li Fan really was, and his purpose in sneaking onto Lioli Island. Li Fan, with a darkened expression, ignored the question and asked one of his own, wanting to know how Fatty knew he wasn't from the departed realm. Fatty explained that when they fell into the water, he vaguely saw Li Fan suddenly emerge from underwater. At first, he thought it was an illusion, but later, after thinking it over carefully, he realized Li Fan wasn't in their group when they left the departed realm. It seems this Fatty was quite astute and sharp-minded, but completely oblivious to the edgy and chilling tone in Li Fan's voice. And to make matters even worse, he proceeded to reveal that he was the only person who noticed Li Fan had snuck in, completely fucking himself over. When he was even asked about being absolutely sure, this idiot proudly confirmed it, unaware of Li Fan's looming figure with a sword as he called the others fools for not noticing. That's when a sword was plunged straight through his chest from behind. Fatty's face turned ashen before dropping lifelessly on the floor, permanently offed. Li Fan placed the sword back inside the Taihang Arc, then Fatty's corpse, thinking of how utterly clueless he was. Relying on a bit of cleverness, Fatty discovered Li Fan might have snuck in under a false identity, and he couldn't wait to come and threaten him. He didn't even stop to think that people from the departed realm also get their household registration by falsely claiming to be refugees. Now that Fatty had a Lioli Island household registration, he really thought of himself as a native. Anyway, that immortal master whose face was unclear, the one who came to meet them, and Sunjong's Tianbao Lu, they all acted very cautiously, afraid of being found out. Clearly, the identity of being immortal from the land of exile was something that must be kept secret. So the Tianbao Lu and that group from the departed realm wouldn't dare to investigate this with great fanfare. Even if they investigate and find out Fatty came to see him before he disappeared, as long as Li Fan insists he never saw him, they can't do anything to him because not even a body can be found. Li Fan thoroughly cleaned away Fatty's blood, then discarded the evidence in the Taihang Arc. A few days passed, and just as Li Fan expected, aside from Su Changyu who came to ask him a single question, Fatty's mysterious disappearance didn't attract anyone else's attention. During these past few days, he had been inquiring about various matters on the island while planning how to reasonably use the treasures from the Taihang Arc. Gradually, he came to have a general understanding of this Lioli Island where he was at present. This sea region was called the Zongyun Sea. It was vast and boundless, with tens of thousands of islands scattered across it. Lioli Island was located in the south-central part of the Zongyun Sea and was of medium size. It was named Lioli Island because the surrounding waters were abundant with a type of delicious fleshy fish called the Lioli fish. These Lioli fishes were very popular among mortals, and certain elixirs refined by immortal masters also used the Lioli pearls which occasionally form inside their bodies. Therefore, the immortal master presiding over Lioli Island must collect a certain number of Lioli pearls each year. Going out to sea to catch Lioli fish was the most popular job, and one only need to turn over 70% of the catch, and keep the remaining 30% to sell. But unfortunately, going out to sea requires large boats, and the schools of Lioli fish were unpredictable. Finding the schools requires a special spirit lure from the island. The spirit lure was only distributed by the Lioli Manor when going out to sea and was collected upon return. Private fishing was not allowed. If caught, the penalty was immediate execution. Therefore, Fishing for lioli fish can only be done with permission from the lioli manor. A few days ago, a fleet that went out to sea not only returned with a great haul of lioli fish but also encountered a shipwreck. This shipwreck was carrying over a dozen chests of gold, silver, and jewels. This time, the fleet lucked out completely. Regarding the items salvaged from the shipwreck, the island's rules were the same as for the lioli fish, so they could keep 30% for themselves, and the remaining 70% must be handed over to the authorities. When this fleet returned to port, half of the island was in an uproar. Even the island's financial supervisor, Steward Chin, came to inspect it personally. Many people on the island began to pull strings privately, trying to secure a spot for the next sea voyage. So with this intel, Li Fan deduced that as long as he can go out to sea alone, he can launder the treasures from the Taihang Ark through a shipwreck. But the only difficulty was how to obtain the qualification to go out to sea alone. There were too many people on the island who want to join the fleet. So after some casual inquiries, he learned the means to do so. Apparently, the key was the island lord of Lioli Island who had 3 trusted aides: Steward Zhao, Steward Zhou, and Steward Qin. Steward Zhao was in charge of personnel, Steward Qin was in charge of finances, and Steward Zhou was in charge of security. But the vast majority of spots for the fleet's sea voyages were in Steward Qin's hands. Steward Zhao and Steward Zhou have always wanted to get involved, but Steward Qin has maintained tight control, only allocating 1 or 2 fleets to them. Li Fan suddenly remembered the day of the registration and how Steward Zhao's attitude towards him was different from the others. And although he didn't know the reason why, he reasoned that perhaps he should go see him. But Steward Zhao wasn't someone the current Li Fan could see just because he wanted to. So Li Fan decided to go through Sunjong of the Heavenly Treasure Tower. However, at the entrance, he was given the cold shoulder and ordered to leave immediately due to his status. The guard, firm with his words, wanted to know who Li Fan was to want to see Sunjong. Li Fan, accustomed to such treatment in the immortal Forsaken Land, wasn't deterred at all. But what really bugged him was how the guards made the decision without even asking for instructions, as if they already knew who he was. After all, since the Heavenly Treasure Tower was open for business, where was the logic in driving people away without even seeing them? Li Fan wondered if something had happened, changing the tacit cooperation between Sunjong and the people from the departed realm, which inadvertently caused Sunjong to turn hostile and ignore him by association. So after some inquiries, he found out what happened from the son of the Prince of Jinnan. Apparently, it turns out that in order to get rid of the miasma in his body as soon as possible, Su Changyu resolutely chose to become a test subject. And before leaving, he also signed his name on the 3rd remaining contract. With that, the 3 contracts were completed, and the contract document had completely dissipated. There were no longer any ties between the departed realm and Tianbao Lu. At this point, it's no wonder they suddenly turned hostile and deliberately avoided them. Li Fan just didn't expect Su Changyu to be so decisive. The young guy had advised Su Changyu not to be so hasty, but he wouldn't even listen, because apparently he had a terminally ill sister. And if it weren't to save her, he wouldn't have been so desperate. Li Fan, in deep thoughts, tried to think of another strategy. Although Sunjong chose to avoid him, he wasn't going to give up that easily. Judging by how he couldn't help but comfort Su Changyu that day, Li Fan reasoned that Sunjong was at least not a wicked man. And the reason he kept a cold face before was probably just that he didn't want to be too involved with mortals from the immortal Forsaken Land. After all, compared to strangers, he also preferred dealing with people whose background he knew a little about. So he returned once more and waited patiently in front of the Heavenly Treasure Tower. But upon seeing Li Fan, the guards were annoyed as they questioned if he was looking for death. Li Fan deliberately raised his voice just to pique the interest of the crowd, and explained that he came to do business with the Heavenly Treasure Tower, but it seems the guards want to drive him away without even talking. He then asked the panicked guard if this was how the Heavenly Treasure Towers treats guests. The immediate chorus of murmurs among the gathered crowd forced the guard's hand, so he rushed inside to relay Li Fan's message, and after returning with instructions, he quietly led Li Fan inside. Li Fan patiently took a seat in a guest room, and was served a cup of tea by a maid. Taking a sip, his expression suddenly changed to sheer delight after having a taste. But in that very moment, Sunjong walked in and mentioned that the tea was a Dayu's pale dragon. It grows on the submarine volcanic craters around Dayu Island, and there were only a dozen or so plants. Now, with the destruction of Dayu Island, the Dayu pale dragon had temporarily become a unique rarity. Li Fan maintained his smile upon hearing this, then replied that he seems to be lucky enough to bask in Elder Sunjong's light. Sunjong, with a stern look, reminded Li Fan that their matters of Dali were finished. There should be no more entanglements between him and anyone from the departed realm. So why had Li Fan sought him out for the second time? Li Fan explained that he had been misunderstood because he was indeed there to discuss a business deal. Nothing more. Sun Zhang couldn't help staring at Li Fan with a mocking smile. Aside from Su Changyu, he simply couldn't comprehend anyone else from the bunch having any beneficial deal. However, upon seeing the way Li Fan just simply stared back at him made him falter for a slight moment. The two held each other's gaze for a brief moment too long before Sun Zhang reluctantly pulled up a chair to take a seat. He asked Li Fan what business deal he wanted to discuss. And like a man far beyond his age, Li Fan calmly pitched his idea. He first asked if the Heavenly Treasure Tower was interested in a quota for the seafaring fleet. And Sun Zhang explained that every time the fleet goes out to sea, not to mention the treasures that can be salvaged, just the lioli fish and other marine specialties were enough to make a fortune. So if he was to say that their Heavenly Treasure Tower wasn't interested, then it would be a lie. However, the fleet quotas were firmly controlled by Steward Qian. Let alone their tower, even Steward Zhao can only get 1 or 2 spots. Li Fan was a newcomer after all, so what ability did he have to dare scheme for it? Li Fan wasn't the least bit rattled with this intel and simply asked for a meeting with Steward Zhao. His expression firm and determined. He added that he had his own way to persuade Steward Zhao if he was allowed to see him. A deafening silence suddenly ensues as Sun Zhang stared at Li Fan with a furrowed brow, his decision unclear as he tried to gauge the weight of Li Fan's words. Then, very abruptly, someone authoritatively interrupted, drawing the gazes of the two men. This person, the shopkeeper, was a young woman with a veil covering half of her face. She told Sun Zhang to simply let Li Fan see Steward Zhao. After all, it wasn't a difficult thing to do. However, if Li Fan fails, he would be chopped up and thrown into the sea to feed the fish. Sun Zhang immediately got up and respectfully offered his greetings as she gracefully took over. Li Fan spared no time offering his sincere gratitude, thanking her for the opportunity. But the shopkeeper simply brushed it off, almost amused. Since Li Fan seems to have some confidence, it didn't look like he was talking big. Li Fan replied that he always keeps his promises. His word was his bond. Anyway, granting an audience with Steward Zhao was no skin off her back. And if Li Fan really succeeds, her Heavenly Treasure Tower can even extract a corresponding benefit. But according to the island's rules, 3/10 of the harvest from each voyage can be kept for oneself. Li Fan doesn't want a single cent of those 3/10. He proposed half of it goes to Steward Zhao, and the other half goes to the Heavenly Treasure Tower. Perplexed, the shopkeeper wanted to know what Li Fan wanted in return after going to such great lengths. Li Fan boldly expressed his desire to enter the body-purifying spirit pool engaged once in every 3 years. Upon hearing this, Sun Zhang and the shopkeeper were equally stunned. Then, unable to hold it in, the shopkeeper began laughing wholeheartedly. She couldn't believe that Li Fan, at his age, still wanted to learn from others to cultivate immortality. Li Fan remained silent and unbothered as she laughed to her heart content, before adding that only by seeking eternal life will he have no regret even if he dies. The sincerity in his words seemed to shut her laughter up real quick, a slight contemptuous smile suddenly forming on her lips. She then agrees to help Li Fan with this matter. With everything settled, the shopkeeper informed Li Fan to wait until a date was set. Then she would send someone to notify him. Li Fan thanked her once again and took his leave, not forgetting to add that he was staying in house number 7, 6th longitudinal outside the city. They can find him there if anything else happens. The moment he was out of earshot, Sun Zhang questioned the shopkeeper about that spot in the body-purifying spirit pool. And she calmly replied that although the competition for spots in the body-purifying spirit pool was fierce every year, her Heavenly Treasure Tower wasn't without the strength to compete. If Li Fan can truly secure a seafaring fleet, then in just 5 years, the profits brought by the fleet would be enough to cover the cost of a spot. This business is a sure win with no loss. However, Sun Zhang immediately asked her what the matter was after her abrupt unease. And the shopkeeper could only explain that Li Fan's eyes looked quite scary, leaving Sun Zhang speechless. Anyway, on the way back, Li Fan stopped by a pharmacy and bought the profound yellow heart-cleansing incantation and the matching medicinal herbs. Even if everything goes smoothly, it will still be 2 years before the body-purifying spirit pool opens. So he might as well try cultivating it first to see the effects. Perhaps he might have amazing natural talent and can purge the miasma from his body himself without needing to wait for 2 years. For the next few days, Li Fan stayed at home, cultivated diligently, and waited for the indefinite meeting with Steward Zhao. But who would have thought that before Li Fan even meets Steward Zhao, he would hear a rather shocking piece of news. Su Changyu died, and when his corpse was sent back, only a twisted mass of flesh and blood remained. It didn't look human at all, and was truly terrifying. The flesh and blood would even twitch inexplicably, making one's scalp numb. And on top of that, The people from the departed realm were newcomers and couldn't even scrape together enough money to buy a grave plot. They originally planned to bury him at sea, but Li Fan couldn't stand watching that. So he took out some money to let Su Changyu rest in peace in the earth. Even though their encounter was brief, Xiaoheng, the heir to the Prince of Jinnan of the departed realm, was deeply shaken and cried miserably at Su Changyu's burial site. And as for Li Fan, he didn't particularly feel much, just a bit of a sigh. After all, he didn't know the guy, but the way Su Changyu conducted himself decently and had a firm will, it wasn't a stretch to consider him as a genius. Although not a genius rarely seen in a century, Su Changyu was definitely no mediocrity. Among the group from the departed realm, Li Fan originally thought Su Changyu was the most likely to make a name for himself. Yet such a person couldn't even survive the prerequisite requirement of cultivation purging miasma and died so silently. The path of immortality was truly difficult. Anyway, in the subsequent process of cultivating the profound yellow heart-cleansing incantation, Li Fan's understanding of those words became increasingly profound. But facts proved that he wasn't some peerless genius either. For nearly a month, he lived in seclusion, cultivating this heart-cleansing incantation every day. So generally speaking, even those with mediocre aptitude would see obvious effects like improved spirits and faster thinking after cultivating for half a month. However, a month had passed, and Li Fan surprisingly didn't feel any changes. He wasn't anxious though, and just treated it as a mandatory daily cultivation task. Another half a month passed like this, and finally, the people from the Heavenly Treasure Tower arrived. And following a messenger, he finally met Steward Zhao in a courtyard owned by the Heavenly Treasure Tower. Li Fan respectfully greeted him, adding that it's been quite some time, but Steward Zhao skipped the pleasantries and went straight to the point. He'd heard from the people at the Heavenly Treasure Tower that Li Fan wants a spot for a seafaring fleet. It seems his appetite was quite big, but what backing did he have? Li Fan couldn't agree more, and although he didn't reveal any backing, he knew a fleet going out to sea seeks nothing but profit. So he was curious about Steward Zhao's thoughts on the profit for catching the lily fish compared to retrieving treasures directly from sunken ships on the ocean floor. Salvaging treasures were worth several regular fishing trips. But the issue was how could one encounter such a good thing every time? Steward Zhao had been on this island for over a dozen years, and from his memory, there had only been a few scant times with major harvests. But Li Fan confidently declared that if he were to command a fleet, he can guarantee that every time they go out to sea, they will bring back a certain amount of treasure. With an intense stare, Steward Zhao calmly strokes his beard and unexpectedly admits that Li Fan didn't lie. Although Li Fan didn't talk big, he was genuinely curious as to how Steward Zhao actually managed to discern the truth in his words. Steward Zhao explained that he was born with a pair of unique eyes that can recognize talent and distinguish truth from falsehood. Just now when Li Fan spoke, he only saw a soft white light emitting from Li Fan's body, proving that his words were true and harbored no ill intentions. To think there is such a unique art. Li Fan was amazed and a bit surprised as he recalls their first encounter. On the day of registration, Steward Zhao's attitude toward him seemed slightly different from the others. It seems he saw something then. Steward Zhao only saw that Li Fan was extremely wealthy and had quite a bit of blood on his hands. Obviously not an ordinary person. That's why he was a bit polite to Li Fan, forming a good karma in passing. In that case, on the day of the registration, Steward Zhao must have also realized that Sunjong from the Heavenly Treasure Tower wasn't speaking the truth. However, whether what Sunjong said back then was the truth or a lie, with an immortal master presiding over the island, they weren't afraid of trouble. As long as a person minded his own business, nothing will happen to him. And besides, gathering refugees was also the immortal master's order. So if Sunjong can bring so many refugees to his Liuli island, how could he make things difficult for him? Anyway, with this intel, Li Fan was wondering if Steward Zhao could consider the matter of the seafaring spot since he could see that he wasn't speaking falsely. Steward Zhao took a seat and replied calmly, pointing out the obvious. Li Fan was a newcomer with no foundation, so if he rashly hand a fleet over to him, it will certainly cause much dissatisfaction. He rather proposed Li Fan goes with the fleet the next time they head to sea. If he really can salvage treasure every time he goes out, then in just a few trips the crew will surely be convinced through his abilities. At that time, Li Fan can take over the fleet justifiably. Li Fan thanked Steward Zhao, and also complimented his thorough way of thinking. Back at the Heavenly Treasure Tower, the shopkeeper was absolutely shocked and bewildered to hear that Li Fan actually managed to convince Steward Zhao so easily. With the confirmation from Sunjong, the shopkeeper was now totally convinced Li Fan wasn't talking big, and indeed had the confidence to secure the fleet. At the same time, Sunjong also began to wonder what backing Li Fan actually had. The shopkeeper then instructed Sunjong to send Li Fan the title deed for the vacant courtyard on East Street in the city. This absolutely stunned Sunjong, who couldn't comprehend what he just heard. They spent a fortune to acquire that courtyard, preparing to use it to bribe Steward Shin. How can they just let Li Fan have it so cheaply? And even if they were to give it to him, they should wait until he helps them secure the fleet first. The shopkeeper, firm with her decision, instructed Sunjong to just do as he's told. If they really wait until then, a mere small courtyard won't be enough to befriend Li Fan. Sunjong sent someone to deliver the title deed to Li Fan, and Li Fan naturally didn't refuse the gift. Since he didn't have much to pack, he moved into the courtyard house on East Street that very day. Compared to the slums outside the city, the environment of this courtyard was more than just a little better. Afterwards, he politely declined the few maids sent by the Heavenly Treasure Tower. He settled down there quietly, waiting for the next time the fleet would set sail. Originally, Li Fan thought it wouldn't take long, but who knew an unforeseen event would push the date of the departure into the indefinite future. A massive windstorm hit Lioli Island, destroying everything in its immediate surroundings. It was so destructive that Li Fan could feel the tremors inside his new home all the way in the city. Alarmed by this disaster, he rushed outside to his courtyard, only to be startled seeing several strong storms just behind what appears to be some sort of a formation. And just outside the formation, the destructive power of the raging windstorm with little to no rain or snow was evident to see. Unlike Dayu Island, which got wrecked by a similar windstorm not long ago, Lioli Island is fortunate to have an immortal master who informed the islanders that the Grand Protective Formation had been activated, so there was no need to panic. They should simply hide inside their homes and not come out until everything quieted down. The residents of Lioli Island began praising and practically worshipping the immortal master as a merciful being. Back to Li Fan, who kept staring at the formation silently and filing anything he could learn from this experience, noticed that the blue light of the island's protection Grand Formation flows and turns, and the faintly emerging characters also look exceptionally profound and mysterious. Also, about the howling sound just now, like ghosts weeping along with the raindrops, have all been completely shut out by the light barrier. Meanwhile, outside was the violent storm, while inside was calm and tranquil. Li Fan questioned if this was the means of the immortals. Just then, his eyes widened very abruptly as a heavenly divine thunder violently struck the formation, and the aftershock of the collision between it and the Grand Formation created an overwhelming pressure that instantly brought him to his knees, spurting a mouth full of fresh blood in the process. Li Fan, shell-shocked, couldn't fathom such power from just a thunder strike, and what's more, it appears to be just one of many installed for the island, as several started striking around and on the island like a divine punishment. Li Fan gritted his teeth with uncertainty, wondering if his 10th lifetime was going to end there like this. Fortunately, the Island Protection Grand Formation was more reliable than he imagined. It actually held on without shattering. And just like that, time passed slowly, and although he didn't know how long, the great waves finally began to calm down, and it was only calming down, that's all. The windstorm came quickly but left slowly, and amidst the wind and rain, it was hard to distinguish day from night. Li Fan felt that a full 2 or 3 days had passed before the windstorm finally receded. He also heard from the islanders that the windstorm was actually on a relatively small scale. The windstorm 15 years ago was several times more powerful than this one. At that time, the Island Protection Grand Formation could barely maintain itself and was forced to shrink its protective range. After that windstorm, Lioli Island's area was reduced to only 1/3 of its original size. And in the dozen years following that windstorm, Lioli Island gathered refugees from all over, and only then did it slowly recover its vitality. Li Fan was still reeling about the windstorm as he stared at the shady clouded sky, never imagining that the might of heaven and earth was terrifying to this extent. Anyway, a few days after the windstorm, all residents on Lioli Island received instructions, requiring every household to inspect whether the Island Protection Grand Formation had any damage. The method of inspection was simple. The Lioli Manor would distribute a spirit talisman, and one only needed to hang the spirit talisman in their home for a few days and nights, then observed if any red light would emerge. The Island Protection Grand Formation had 367,800 nodes, so they must ensure that there are no abnormalities in any of them. Under the will of the Immortal Master, and also out of consideration for their own safety, everything on Lioli Island was paused to prioritize the maintenance of the Island Protection Grand Formation. In the past, the Immortal Master would coordinate the maintenance work for the landmass, but this time, it is said that the spirit stones maintaining the landmass's operation were nearly exhausted, so the Immortal Master returned to Wanxian Island to retrieve spirit stones. The landmass inspection self-counts 360 flashes of the spirit talisman as one small cycle, and 360 small cycles as one large cycle. As long as no red light emerges within one large cycle, It represents that the landmass was unharmed. Li Fan was impressed and amazed with the Island Protection Grand Formation. It was so massive yet incredibly intricate, and truly hard to imagine how it was built. 5 days later, the result that made everyone on the island breathe a sigh of relief came out. The Island Protection Grand Formation was undamaged. And with the return of the Immortal Master, the residents of the island finally completely set their minds at ease. Life on Lioli Island gradually returned to normal. In the following months, refugees from other islands arrived at Lioli Island from time to time to seek asylum. These survivors were only a minority, and the vast majority of people on their islands had died in the recent windstorm. The Tseongyun Sea region was vast and boundless, with an unknown number of islands, large and small. Only those islands with special resources would have an immortal master presiding over them. Anyway, during these few months, Li Fan didn't stay idle. He persisted in cultivating the profound yellow heart-cleansing incantation every day, and finally, there were results. But both the upper limit of his physiological age and psychological age had increased once more. And although the margin wasn't large, it still made him feel energized. So just like that, another month passed, and news from Steward Zhao finally came. Apparently, the windstorm in the Tseongyun Sea had completely disappeared, and the fleet's next departure was imminent. 3 days later, on Lioli Island's pier, Li Fan met up with Tseongyun that Steward Zhao told him to come to, and after a few exchange, he boarded the ship. Meanwhile, on board, some of the crew members wondered what kind of madness had seized the island lord to organize this sort of assessment. After all, the fleet with the smallest harvest this voyage will be deemed unqualified, and will have their future sailing qualifications cancelled. How can this be good? And it was all caused by the windstorm. There has also been rumors that the Island Protection Grand Formation of Coral Island to the south shattered, and the entire island was razed to the ground. And those supplies that Coral Island needed to submit have fallen onto their Lioli Island's head. The two crew members questioned what kind of situation this disaster had put their Lioli Island in, and how they were supposed to live in the future. It was said that it's only temporary, and they just need to make up for what was owed before. The boss of the crew, Zhang Haobo, yells at the two for their cowardly behavior. Why don't they look on the bright side? Doesn't the first place also receive a reward? And the share of the harvest was increased from 30% to 50%. The crew dejectedly tells Zhang Haobo to stop dreaming. First place? With their fishing skills? Yeah, right. He was pretty much aware that they barely complete the fishing quota every time. Another agreed with what was said. The way he sees it, this will be their last time going out to sea. He even suggests they just not go back and become free and unfettered pirates. Musing over the idea, he comments on how thrilling that would be. Zhang Haobo assures them not to worry. There was a capable person on the ship this time around. He introduced Li Fan to the crew and guaranteed that they would return fully loaded. The crew were skeptical when they heard this, and upon seeing how pale and clean Li Fan was, they wondered if he had ever been to sea. Zhang Haobo yelled at them for being blind fools. Can't they recognize a noble person when they see one? Zhang Haobo then declared Li Fan as a great talent specially invited by Steward Zhao, and he would be taking over their ship soon, so they needed to be more polite towards their new captain. The crew, as expected when aggravated, yells that their boss, Zhang Haobo, had been the captain of the Tseongyun ship for almost 10 years. So how can he just give it up like that? One of them even added that Zhang Haobo had saved his life in the past. So if he's being driven out of his position, then he, Lu San, would be the first to disagree. He won't stand for this injustice. Zhang Haobo gave a humorous chuckle and nodded slightly, quite pleased with himself for instigating this intimating tactic to show Li Fan who was really in charge. He watched Li Fan's reaction with a sly smile as the crew continued to yell, expressing their dissatisfaction. They even suggested throwing Li Fan into the sea to feed the fish once they set sail. After all, it was perfectly normal for someone to die at sea anyway. Zhang Haobo tells the crew to calm down, then acting all ungrudgingly, he stated that even though he knew everyone thought highly of him, the Tseongyun ship was Steward Zhao's property after all, and at the end of the day they were merely selling their lives for him. And now that Steward Zhao had declared he wants to change personnel, he has no choice in the matter. Li Fan listened quietly, and having lived through several lifetimes, these moral coercion and public manipulation were nothing but petty tricks to him. He cut in with a firm and commanding tone, questioning the crew whether they do not trust Steward Zhao, who apparently trusted him to lead them. Are they insinuating the Lord's aid has bad eyes? Since he had already promised Steward Zhao that he can find treasures every time they set sail, he certainly won't let everyone down by association. The crew immediately began to think things over as they seriously started to wonder if Li Fan was actually someone with some sort of skills. After all, Steward Zhao's eyes were incredible. and there's basically never a time his eyes had looked wrongly, so Li Fan's words was probably true. Meanwhile, Zhang Haobu's face had darkened when he realized that his sly tactics had gone to shit. It had failed spectacularly with just a few words from Li Fan, and this was pissing him off. He turned sharply with an accusatory finger pointed in Li Fan's direction, claiming he was spouting nonsense about finding treasures every time they set sail. It's clearly horseshit and he doesn't believe it. Zhang Haobu believes Li Fan had obviously used connections to snatch his position as captain. Did he take him for a fool? Anyway, since Li Fan likes talking big, he'd like to see how he would fare in the end. Zhang Haobu gave the command to set sail and head out to sea. The Songyuan moved without wind, sailing out of the port and heading towards the vast sea, relying not on wind power nor manpower, but on a set of micro-spell formations driven by spirit stones. The ship was also equipped with a spirit lure, so when traces of Lioli fish are discovered in nearby waters, the spirit lure will issue a guide. But the sea is vast, and the range the spirit lure can perceive is limited. So it requires extremely experienced crew members to first find the general range where the fish schools appear. However, when encountering the ravages of a windstorm or the migration of fish schools, all past experience becomes useless. One can only look for a needle in a haystack, relying entirely on luck. And the Songyuan's luck seemed to be not so good. More than half a month passed. Apart from netting some ordinary fish schools and finding some conventional marine minerals, there were no major harvests. Not only were the crew members all wearing long faces, but even Zhang Haobu began to feel anxious in his heart. After all, there is a punishment for being last place this time. The rule on the island was to return within a month. They've only caught this little bit of stuff this time. It's quite possible they really have the smallest harvest. They can only hope for a turn of events in the next few days. Zhang Haobu stares at the sky, hoping the immortal master protects them. In that moment, Li Fan came out from the cabin, and upon seeing him, Zhang Haobu was quick to throw shade, wanting to know if Li Fan had finally decided to grace them with his presence. If it weren't for his daily meals, Zhang Haobu would have thought Li Fan had died in his room. Li Fan simply requested for a small boat because he'd sensed sunken treasures nearby. Zhang Haobu, completely gobsmacked, screamed in absolute disbelief. He began to stutter, questioning Li Fan if he was joking. But once again, Li Fan just instructed him to quickly prepare a small boat for him. He had seen jewelries shining with brilliance under the deep sea, waiting for him to salvage it. The opportunity was fleeting, and the light of the treasures was becoming dim. Li Fan told him to hurry before he loses its bearings. Zhang Haobu immediately ordered the crew to prepare the boat at once. And in just a few minutes, the small boat was prepared with Li Fan on board. But before leaving, he told them not to follow and should simply wait for his signal. When they asked why, Li Fan replied that they were too noisy, and their noise could easily interrupt his line of sight. Obviously, this left the crew completely speechless. As Li Fan set off and out of earshot, Lu San asked Zhang Haobu if it was possible that Li Fan was running away by himself. Zhang Haobu dismissed this as silly talk. After all, the sea was vast and Li Fan didn't bring any dry rations along. So where could he possibly run off to? 2 hours later, the crew saw Li Fan's signal in a distance and quickly sailed the ship over. When they arrived at the spot, Li Fan pointed to a spot underwater and added that the treasure was there. Zhang Haobu instructed them to cast the net and prepare to make a dive. Less than an hour later, 16 chests of gold and silver were loaded on board. And as they shined brightly under the moonlight, Zhang Haobu, for the first time in his life, couldn't help but seriously think about that Songyuan's stroke of good fortune. And it was thanks to Li Fan. He wasn't bragging and actually allowed the crew to return fully loaded. It seems everything he said was actually true. He can actually really find sunken treasures at the bottom of the sea. This kind of ability had undoubtedly made him an extraordinary person. An extremely extraordinary person just like Steward Zhao. In that moment, Zhang Haobu, completely humbled, was regretful for the way he had treated Li Fan. After all, it was rare to have a chance to meet such a noble person. And it was fine if he didn't grasp this opportunity, but to actually ridiculously think said person was there to snatch his tiny little fleet. Zhang Haobu felt a profound sense of shame and realized he needed to apologize immediately. So as soon as Li Fan boarded the ship once again, Zhang Haobu earnestly came to bow and apologize to him. After dismissing him pleasantly, Li Fan returned to his room to rest. After all, having obtained the treasures, the Songyuan ship stopped fishing, and immediately turned around, setting course back to Lioli Island. Since the harvest this time was so great, the entire crew wasn't able to rest easy until they returned safely to the island. At the harbor, Zhang Haobu told them not to dock just yet. He then instructed Lu San to quietly slip into the water and go notify Steward Zhao. Lu San should ask him to personally send people to do the inventory. Lu San gave a nod and effortlessly left the ship. Zhang Haobo turned towards the rest of the crew and boldly declared that if nothing unexpected happens, their harvest should be the largest among the fleet that went out to sea this time around. And according to the rules, they get to keep 50%. If outsiders do the counting, they will inevitably deduct or miscalculate. Zhang Haobo doesn't feel at ease unless it's their own people. The crew cheered him on, agreeing wholeheartedly and claiming that even losing a little bit of their cut would distress them to death. After waiting for some time, the Zhongyuan docked at the shore, but the personnel for the routine inventory were blocked by Zhang Haobo and the crew members. When they questioned the meaning of what they were doing, the crew said nothing and still made no move of letting them on board to take the inventory. One of them deduced that judging by the ship's draft, that Zhongyuan returned empty-handed this time around also. And from the looks of it, Zhang Haobo's time as captain of the Zhongyuan ship was coming to an end as well. The crew members nearly engaged in a verbal spat with them before Zhang Haobo shut that down real quick. He reasoned that there was no need to argue with them. Li Fan quietly watched the entire scene, noting that there was a reason why Zhang Haobo could sit firmly in the position of captain of the Zhongyuan. It was only his background and experience that seemed to limit him. Anyway, Steward Zhao personally arrived with his men shortly after. And as 16 chests of jewelries were carried off the ship under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the entire dock caused a sensation. Consequently, the news that the Zhongyuan had harvested a massive amount of treasures spread like wildfire and soon covered the entire Liuli Island. Meanwhile, at the Heavenly Treasure Tower, Sun Zhang barged in on the shopkeeper, looking all flustered. When she asked what the matter was, Sun Zhang, huffing profusely, stammered coherently about the Zhongyuan ship, treasures, and over 10 chests of them. The shopkeeper didn't understand what was there to make a fuss about if it was just over 10 chests of treasures, and presumed a client wanted to digest these things on the island. If they do, then they still have to go through their Heavenly Treasure Tower's channels. She stops abruptly when realization hits her. The Zhongyuan was the ship Li Fan boarded to set sail a month ago. Sun Zhang, still breathless, confirmed this, adding that it was no wonder Li Fan could persuade Steward Zhao. He was absolutely certain he would find treasures as soon as he went out to sea. Sun Zhang then declared that Li Fan's ability seemed to be just like their Heavenly Treasure Tower's grand shopkeeper. The shopkeeper immediately gave the order for Sun Zhang to go arrange a meeting with Li Fan immediately. She wanted to know when they can invite him for a meal. Also, he should send someone to clean up the tower, then send the title deed over to Li Fan. Without hesitation, Sun Zhang agreed to do as he's told and left. The shopkeeper wondered if Li Fan has a spirit-channeling treasure physique. Apparently, the legendary spirit-channeling treasure physique. As long as rare treasures exist within a certain range of oneself, one will sense them. And the grand shopkeeper of the Heavenly Treasure Tower, Yin Yuding, the shopkeeper's older sister, also possesses this special constitution. And it was precisely by relying on this heaven-defying ability that her sister built the Heavenly Treasure Tower. This large-scale chamber of commerce now spans the Zhongyuan Sea from nothing over the past dozen years. And to think that another spirit-channeling treasure physique had appeared now was truly surprising and unexpected. As the scene shifts to Steward Zhao's manor, Li Fan had paid him a visit. Steward Zhao first praised Li Fan. He truly was extraordinary. Fishing up 16 chests of treasures on his first time out to sea, Li Fan really gave him a huge surprise. The harvest this time was indeed substantial, but Li Fan was afraid it will be hard to get this much in the future. Steward Zhao agrees with this assessment. That stands to reason. How could one have such luck every time? However, just relying on the harvest this time around is enough for him to operate a separate fleet for Li Fan. Upon hearing this, Li Fan thanked him for the opportunity. Anyway, Steward Zhao heard that Li Fan had racked his brains just to seek a spot in the body-purifying spirit pool. Li Fan confirmed that it was precisely so. Even with inexhaustible treasures, one will turn into a pile of yellow earth after 100 years. Only by seeking immortality, asking for the Tao, and witnessing eternal life is this trip to the world not in vain. Steward Zhao admired Li Fan's resolved determination. To still have a heart that yearns for the Tao at his age, he admits he's inferior to him. Over 10 years ago, when Steward Zhao was the same age as Li Fan was at present, he once saved an immortal master by a stroke of luck. The immortal master asked if he was willing to follow him to cultivate, but Steward Zhao knew he had long passed the best age for cultivation. Even if he cultivated, he might not achieve anything. Moreover, the older one gets, the more deep-rooted the miasma in the body becomes, and the more painful it is to remove. Now, as he gets older, he vaguely feels regret. But it's a pity that there is no medicine for regret in this world. Among the hundreds of thousands of mortals on Liuli Island, those like Li Fan were truly the minority. Li Fan's response to the flattery was cordial, but he was wondering about the matter regarding the quota for the body-purifying spirit pool, if Steward Zhao could help him secure a spot. Unfortunately, Steward Zhao replied that he can't help Li Fan with this matter. The opening of the body-purifying spirit pool requires the island's immortal master to preside over it, and the quota is also decided by the immortal master. 1 year before opening the spirit pool, the immortal master will announce the required materials, and each family collects the materials on the list and hands them over. The quota is decided based on the amount of contribution points. However, Li Fan doesn't need to worry. The Heavenly Treasure Tower has open branches on every island in the Zhongyun Sea. If they are talking about the ability to collect materials, there aren't many on Liuli Island who can compare to them. With this intel, it seems Li Fan's priority about the Heavenly Treasure Tower needed some adjustments. And speaking about the Heavenly Treasure Tower, just as he returned to his small courtyard from Steward Zhao's manor, Sun Zhang came to his door with the title deed. It was obvious that he had been waiting for a long time. Although surprised, Li Fan was actually interested in meeting the shopkeeper, so he inquired about her, wanting to know whether she was looking for him for something. And since he happened to want to meet her once more, he readily agreed. As for the title deed to the Tingyu Tower that Sun Zhang brought, Li Fan did not accept it. When the two met that very evening, the shopkeeper of Liuli Island's Heavenly Treasure Tower formally introduced herself as Yin Yuzhen. Li Fan did the same, introducing himself formally this time around. Yin Yuzhen was quick to point out how extremely concise Li Fan was with his introduction. Li Fan replied that he was merely a simple mortal, and there was really nothing worth saying. Yin Yuzhen then asked of the spirit channeling treasure physique, wanting to know if that was also not worth mentioning in his eyes either. Li Fan genuinely admits he had no clue what a spirit channeling treasure physique was. But since his composure gives nothing away, Yin Yuzhen was doubtful. If Li Fan didn't have the spirit channeling treasure physique, then how did he manage to find the location of the treasures in the vast sea? Li Fan replied that it was just a feeling in his heart. This reply displeases Yin Yuzhen, who couldn't help but pout with irritation that Li Fan was denying the obvious. But upon seeing that Li Fan seemed to truly not know, Yin Yuzhen told him about it out of helplessness. Li Fan took a moment to mull over this intel, before asking a series of questions which completely caught her off guard. If she was saying that her sister was also a spirit channeling treasure physique, then how old was she, what did she look like, where was she 20 years ago, and where was she now?